Chapter 1774. Initial appearance in a foreign region. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. Since NPCs were in charge of building the teleportation gate at the central plaza, after Shifeng paid the necessary fees, construction took less than 10 minutes. As the pitch-black barrier enveloping the central plaza disappeared, a 6-meter-tall stone gate inside came into view. The ground around the gate had all sorts of divine runes and magic arrays carved into it, which increased the mana density at the central plaza slightly. Currently, a large number of players had gathered around the central plaza, their eyes filled with interest as they looked at the teleportation gate. Some adventurer teams couldn't hold back their curiosity and directly teleported to the 3 border fortresses the teleportation gate connected to. When Shifeng's expedition team arrived at the central plaza, it immediately attracted the attention of every player there. Now that Asura had become the master of Cold Wind City, no power in Cold Wind City dared oppose the adventurer team anymore. Only those seeking to halt their development in Cold Wind City would go against Asura now. Following Shifeng's arrangement, Asura's expedition team started teleporting to the snow ruin in batches. What's Asura trying to do with so many players? Didn't you see that they teleported to the snow ruin? Moreover, there are quite a few low-leveled lifestyle players in the team. I guess that they plan to develop in another region's city. Crap. Asura is too amazing. It's already trying to expand to another city? With this, the guilds of Cold Wind City will fall even further behind Asura. I know, right? I heard that some of the smaller guilds have already disbanded in order to join the Asura adventurer team. Asura's recruitment standard is very high. Although I've reached the trial tower's 4th floor already, I was still deemed too weak when I tried applying. Right now, I can only slowly improve my ranking in the Adventurer Alliance. While the bystanders at the Central Plaza were discussing the Asura adventurer team, Shifeng's group had arrived at the Snow Ruins main hall. Once everyone was present, Shifeng used the hero's key and teleported 500 players to the other end of the primordial teleportation magic array. As for everyone else, they teleported there using the teleportation entry permit. When everyone opened their eyes again, they had already arrived inside an abandoned shrine. The shrine was so dilapidated that snowy white clouds peeked through the many holes in the roof. Meanwhile, this shrine was located at the other end of the snow rift. System, congratulations. You have arrived in the Frozen City region. We made it over just like that? When everyone heard the system notification, they had a sense of unreality. It felt as if they were still in the Cold Wind City region. Alright, everyone get ready. We're setting out for Frozen City. Shifeng commanded. Although they had teleported to another region, they were still inside the snow rift, which remained a forbidden land for players. Needless to say, there were definitely plenty of monsters here. However, before the expedition team even got 1,000 yards away from the abandoned shrine, a group of players suddenly surged out from the snow-capped forest on both sides of the team. Very quickly, these new arrivals not only blocked off the expedition team's path of advance but also formed an encirclement around the team. With a glance, Shifeng and the others could easily tell that this group of new arrivals comprised at least 30,000 players, every one of them wearing Hecate's guild emblem. From the sneers and killing intent these Hecate members displayed, these guild players obviously held bad intentions towards them. Before Shifeng and the others could do anything, the sky above them suddenly darkened. A moment later, everyone in Asura's team gained a debuff that prevented them from using teleportation tools and teleportation skills for 3 hours. The Tier 3 magic scroll wore blockade? Shifeng could not help but frown as he looked at the debuff on him. Commander, this is bad. They clearly came prepared. Right now, we can't even use instantaneous movement magic scrolls to leave this place, Yenya said, an ugly expression on her face as she looked at the Hecate members surrounding them. Their opponent outnumbered them by too much. Moreover, these Hecate members were all very well equipped. Even the weakest piece of equipment on them was level 50 mysterious iron rank. As for their levels, they were all at least level 53. Quite a few of them also radiated a chilling aura. These players were evidently experts that had fought on many battlefields. Most likely they were not the slightest bit weaker than herself and the other Tier 2 experts of Asura. Meanwhile, the 20+ players standing at the forefront of the guild's lineup even felt lethal to Yenya. As Hecate's army drew closer, Asura's members grew anxious. At this time, a berserker clad in dark blue armor walked out from Hecate's army. Looking at Shifeng and the others, the berserker laughed loudly. Ha! Aren't you people from Asura very amazing? Why are you getting afraid now? This berserker was none other than Vast Heaven. It is normal for them to be afraid. After all, we have a total of 40,000 elites and experts gathered here. What could they possibly do with their measly 700 players? Said a slim man clad in dark gray mage robes, standing beside Vast Heaven, chuckling. However, the Vice Guild leader sure has a high opinion of them to have actually sent so many of us here to stop them. The 11 Tier 2 players standing beside him nodded in agreement with the gray-robed man's words. The Vice Guild leader has told me to remind you all to be careful of Asura's commander. That man is very strong, Vast Heaven said as he fixed his gaze on Sherfong. That person is Asura's commander? He doesn't look like much at all. Regardless, since the Vice Guild leader has already said so, leave that person to us. We'll leave the small fries to you, the slim man said as he glanced at Sherfong, a hint of playfulness in his eyes. Blade, I'll attack first later on. You ambush him from the side. We'll give this brat a taste of what it feels to be utterly helpless. Sure. The level 55 Tier 2 assassin standing beside the slim man replied indifferently before disappearing from where he stood. Alright, I'll go deal with those small fries, Vast Heaven said, a hint of disappointment in his voice as he watched the Tier 2 elementalist and Tier 2 assassin moving out. The Tier 2 elementalist walking straight toward Sherfong and the Tier 2 assassin that just disappeared were both part of the 12 Heavens. They also ranked number 1 in their respective classes in Hecate. The elementalist was Cold Brew while the assassin was Blade Hand. Either of them could defeat him easily. Working together would amplify the combat power they could display by multiple times. Hence, instantly killing a Tier 2 player would be child's play for them. At this point, Hecate's other members had also started slowly closing in on Asura's members. Facing such a force, even Yenya, who was a Tier 2 player, could not help but gulp. As for the other experts of Asura, they were already breaking out in a cold sweat. After all, this was the first time they were going up against such a massive force. Resisting the horrific aura and pressure Hecate's army projected was deeply ingrained, yet in such a situation they could only watch the guild players draw near. We're doomed. Hecate is too ruthless. We have only 700 people on our side, yet they actually dispatched so many elite and expert players to deal with us. The members of Asura's expedition team panicked as Hecate's members closed in on them. When less than 100 yards separated the two sides, Cold Brew smiled as he looked at Sherfong. He then chuckled and said, You guys were pretty good at the Snow Ruin before, to have actually claimed the hero mode's first clear and snatched our guild's Cold Wind City. It's a pity that, instead of meekly staying and ruling that backwater city of yours, you even dared to come running over to this place. Well, tell me how you want to die. Everyone relied on their own capabilities to struggle for Cold Wind City. Is there a need to call it snatching? Looking at Cold Brew slowly approaching him, Sherfong smiled and said, Moreover, in Cold Wind City it was clearly you guys that started attacking us first. During this time, you people from Hecate have even ambushed and killed over 400 members of our adventurer team, causing us to suffer severe losses. Today, I'll use this opportunity to claim full compensation from you. Ah. You want to take revenge on us? Cold Brew laughed loudly. Our guild had countless enemies. Unfortunately, we annihilated every one of them in the end. How will your Asura adventurer team take revenge on us? As soon as Cold Brew said so, the large group of experts behind him sprang into action. Like a pack of fierce tigers, they surged towards Asura's members. We'll take revenge like this. Sherfong replied, plucking a scroll and the evil god's eye from his bag. He then unfurled the Tier 3 large-scale destruction magic scroll Purgatory Flames and used the evil god's eye's world power on it. Burn. Purgatory Flames. Chapter 1775, Nightmares Beginning. In the Narrow Valley. As Sherfong completed the Tier 3 magic scroll's incantation, 3 crimson magic arrays appeared beneath and circled Sherfang's feet. Immediately after, the ground started to tremble, extending forward and away from Sherfong. Even Hecate's members who stood over 50 yards away, felt the intense quaking. Damn it! It's a large-scale destruction spell. Everyone dodge. Cold Brew panicked when he noticed a torrent of mana surge toward Sherfong. However, the magic scroll Sherfong had used had a very short channeling time. By the time Hecate's members had noticed it, the 3 crimson magic arrays formation had completed. In the next moment, a gigantic, flaming phoenix, with a wingspan of easily over 100 meters, appeared above Sherfong. The heat the phoenix radiated melted the snow around it. Boom. With a screech, the phoenix flapped its wings once and disappeared, sundering the space it had occupied. In the blink of an eye, the phoenix arrived before Hecate's army. Seeing the approaching avian, horror flashed on the faces of Hecate's members. At the same time, thoughts of escape flooded their minds. However, compared to the phoenix's speed, Hecate's members were little more than snails. Wherever the phoenix passed, a sea of fire followed. When Vast Heaven, who led the charge against Asura's members, saw the flames, his eyes widened in shock. With a frustrated gaze, he turned towards Shifeng as the fire devoured him, his HP falling to 0 instantly as his body turned to ash. After Vast Heaven disappeared, an item took his place. If these flames even killed a Tier 2 player like Vast Heaven upon contact, Hecate's Tier 1 players didn't have a chance of survival. Agonized screams echoed throughout the valley. Asura. Cold Brew's expression darkened as he glared at the phoenix as it flew past him. Due to the valley's narrow terrain, the single attack had claimed more than 3,000 Hecate members. 4 of the 12 heavens who weren't adept at protecting themselves had died as well. The loss Hecate just suffered was egregious. Everyone charge. Let's teach Hecate's members that if they target our adventurer team, they'll have to pay in blood. Shifeng commanded through the team chat as the phoenix disappeared. Asura will fully compensate you for any losses you suffer today. Against an army of 40,000 elite and expert players, even a 100-man Tier 2 team would fall. After all, players had limited stamina. Furthermore, Hecate had come prepared for this ambush. The guild had all kinds of magic scrolls and tools for this battle. Even if the 100 Tier 2 experts could maneuver around the battlefield and dodge incoming attacks, some hits were bound to land. All these players could do was try to flee. Fighting was simply suicide. Originally, Purgatory Flames was an AoE spell that dealt fire damage to an area of 20 by 100 yards, but with World's Powers enhancement, its range had grown to 400 yards. It was just enough to open a path through Hecate's army. As long as they could break free from this encirclement, they would have a chance of survival. Right? At worst, we'll just die once. Isn't that just one piece of equipment? Let them have it. We follow the commander's orders. Nice. I've been itching for some payback. Hearing Shifeng's words, Asura's members burned with fighting spirit, their fear of Hecate vanishing. Good. Let's charge. As his team brimmed with fighting spirit, Shifeng nodded approvingly. He then took out the Bible of Darkness and summoned a Tier 3 demon to remove anyone in his way. He then followed after the demon. Kill these bastards from Hecate. Asura's members flowed into a defensive formation, with the experts around the perimeter and the lifestyle players in the center, and followed after their commander. When he saw Hecate's members start to fill the gap in their army's formation, Shifeng used Flame Domain to reopen his path, instantly slaying another several hundred players. Do not let them escape. All ranged players, attack with everything you've got. Cold Brew shouted as Asura's members tried to escape. He then cast the Tier 2 spell, Frost Flame Bullet, at Asura's members. Frost Flame Bullet had a very strong penetrating ability. Even if players blocked the spell with their weapons or shields, they would receive a significant amount of damage. The 8 Frost Flame Bullets that appeared instantly killed 2 of Asura's experts that had stood along the edge of Asura's formation. The Hecate members who stood along the valley's sides began to launch their own attacks, raining spells and arrows down on Asura's members. Although Asura's members did their best to block these attacks, there were just too many, and some got past their defenses, plowing into these players. Asura's expedition team had lost over 30 players after a single intense bombardment from Hecate's players. The difference in strength was clear for all to see. As Hecate's members prepared to launch a second wave, Yenya displayed her strength. As a Tier 2 druid, her combat power might not be a match for other Tier 2 players, but when it came to defensive and healing capabilities, she was extremely powerful. Tier 2 spell, Song of the Forest. Suddenly, a light green dome with a 50-yard radius formed around Yenya. When Hecate's attacks entered the light green barrier, their power drastically decreased. In addition, the Asura members inside the barrier recovered 2% of their HP every second. Although it wasn't much, this helped to alleviate the burden on the other healers. Due to Song of the Forest, only a dozen or so Asura members died in the second wave of attacks. Seeing the spell's powerful effects, Cold Brew gnashed his teeth and retrieved a precious Tier 3 large-scale destruction magic scroll. He activated it, aiming for Asura's expedition team, but as the spell was about to take effect, Shifeng blocked the attack by activating Absolute Domain. In the end, the spell failed to damage any of Asura's team. Shi Feng proceeded to slaughter Hecate's frontline. He dispatched every melee player that approached his team as fast as possible. He also activated Heavenly Dragon's power to enhance his combat power further. Thundering Flash, Lightning Edge, Shadow Blade. Aside from the players with powerful life-saving skills, the Tier 1 players that stood in Shi Feng's path couldn't last more than one hit against the swordsman. Like the Grim Reaper, Shi Feng harvested the lives of Hecate's members, one after another. To ensure that none of Hecate's members could get past him to target his allies, Shi Feng abandoned his defense. He focused on killing as many enemies as possible, taking some hits in the process. There was no lack of expert players among the Hecate members who charged at Shi Feng, and not only did these experts have incredible aim, but they also had an excellent grasp of timing. While Shi Feng focused on carving a path of blood, spells and arrows skillfully flew toward Shi Feng's blind spots to strike the swordsman. -2,387. -1,657. -1,346. -2,046. Seeing the damages above Shi Feng's heads, the attacking Hecate members gaped, their eyes nearly falling from their sockets. Impossible. My attack only did a little over 1,000 damage. Is he even human? He received so many attacks, yet his HP has barely moved. Hecate's players were horrified as they watched Shi Feng take little to no damage from their ranged allies' attacks as they charged towards Asura's team. Shi Feng slew practically every player in his path with a single attack, and expert players were no exception. He easily maneuvered past their defenses, landing direct hits and killing them instantly. Only expert players that had activated a berserk skill had lasted a few more hits. In contrast, their attacks were little more than raindrops to this swordsman. Even after landing several dozen attacks, they had only managed to drop Shi Feng's HP to 80%. Meanwhile, Asura's healers only needed a split second to restore Shi Feng's HP to full. This was a nightmare. However, things were not looking so good for Asura's members either. Although Shi Feng easily held on, attacks from all sides bombarded his teammates, and they suffered one casualty after another. To make matters worse, more of Hecate's members were drawing near. Just before Hecate's melee unit reached Asura's members and surrounded them, a gigantic magic array appeared above the battlefield before a powerful force swept down from it. Under this force, Hecate's members felt their bodies grow heavy as their attributes and physiques started to wane. In contrast, Asura's members suddenly felt lighter, a surge of power flooding in their bodies. Even their minds cleared considerably. What's going on? Cold Brew could sense that the battlefield's mana density had increased, boosting Asura's attributes. Chapter 1776, Asura's Sword. Hellscythe Undersea Old Cat. After Shi Feng spent 7,000 magic crystals to activate the Ring of Gospel's World Projection and Ring of Brilliance, the attributes of Asura's members increased, and those of Hecate's members decreased. The change immediately alleviated the pressure on Asura's members. Now, Asura's ranged members were able to repel Hecate's melee members with greater ease. Even when their attacks struck the enemy MT's shields, the impact pushed the MTs back, stopping their advance momentarily. After a single round of attacks from Asura's ranged members, the offensive formation of Hecate's MTs shattered. When the second round of attacks descended, over 30 Hecate MTs died. For a moment, Hecate's melee unit couldn't close the distance between itself and Asura's expedition team. Ah! The commander's move is awesome. With this, these bastards can't even come within melee range of us. The Asura members that had begun to despair felt their hopes rekindle. They might be able to cope with Hecate's ranged attacks by blocking and dodging, but if they allowed Hecate's melee members to come in close and personal, they would definitely be in a bind. If they were pinned down for too long, Hecate's ranged members would make quick work of them. Thanks to World Projection and Ring of Brilliance, Asura's advancement had increased considerably. Now, with the exception of Hecate's Tier 2 players, Asura's members held their ground against the incoming attacks. Hecate's Tier 1 players could no longer break their formation. Meanwhile, Shi Feng, who opened a path for his team, was like a killing machine. Despite Shi Feng having only advanced 1/4 of the way through Hecate's blockade, more than 400 players had died by his swords. In addition, Shi Feng's Tier 3 demon disrupted Hecate's formation from time to time. This prevented Hecate's members from slowing Shi Feng down, and Hecate's members could only watch as Shi Feng made his way through their ranks. Blade, go stop him with the vultures. We must not let these people get away. Cold Brew said, gnashing his teeth as he watched Shi Feng plow through Hecate's army unhindered. Shi Feng played a crucial part in this battle. If he hadn't torn a hole in their encirclement, Asura's members wouldn't have had a chance of breaking through. Moreover, too many Hecate members had died at Shi Feng's hands. Shi Feng left only corpses in his wake. If they did not remove the man from the battle now, they would suffer immense losses. Got it? Blade Hand, who had hidden a short distance away from Asura's expedition team, replied through the team chat. He then led the 6 assassins around him and snuck toward Shi Feng. The Vultures was a party of assassins Hecate had specifically nurtured to eliminate important figures in other large guilds. The Vultures had successfully assassinated the upper echelons of super first-rate guilds in the past. When the Vultures were within 30 yards of Shi Feng, the 6 assassins each took a magic array scroll from their bags. When they were within 25 yards, they used shadow steps and instantly appeared beside Shi Feng. Seal. The Vultures moved extremely quickly and simultaneously unfurled the magic array scrolls in their hands. However, Shi Feng's response was also swift. He instantly knew what these newcomers intended to do. Immediately, he began brandishing his swords. Swords orbit. Dazzling stars bombarded the 6 assassins, one after another. With both hands occupied, the Vultures couldn't defend themselves. Hence, they promptly activated wind steps, utilizing the brief invulnerability the skill provided to block Shi Feng's strikes while they continued to activate their magic array scrolls. Suddenly, a magic array formed beneath Shi Feng's feet. He then felt a powerful gravitational pull as chains emerged from the magic array and wrapped around his body, reducing his basic attributes, movement speed and attack speed by 60%. Moreover, a magic barrier formed around him, Blade Hand and the Vultures, sealing them off from the outside world. No attack spells or healing spells would be able to get through this barrier. Die. Blade Hand appeared behind Shi Feng, slashing his 2 daggers at the swordsman while he activated his Berserk skill. Similarly, the 6 Vultures activated their Berserk skills and used Absolute Strike, the assassin class's strongest Tier 1 skill. Since the attacks had been launched from such a close range and Shi Feng's attributes and speed had been drastically reduced, he couldn't defend himself in time. As a result, all 7 attacks hit their mark at the same time. Commander. Anxiety and concern overwhelmed Yenya as she watched Shi Feng take the hits. Facing 1 Tier 2 assassin and 6 Tier 1 assassins with activated Berserk skills, even Shi Feng, who had activated Heavenly Dragon's power, would likely fall. He's finally dead. Cold Brew could not help but breathe a sigh of relief when he saw the attack strike Shi Feng. With Shi Feng dead, the remaining members of Asura were fish on the chopping block. Moreover, the fact that they had killed Shi Feng, the Asura adventurer team's commander, more or less justified the large number of casualties they had suffered. However, unlike Cold Brew, the Vultures and Blade Hand, who were inside the magic array, expressed neither joy nor relief. Instead, they stared at Shi Feng with grim expressions. This was because their weapons had not struck Shi Feng at all. Rather, a translucent barrier enveloping Shi Feng's body had stopped their weapons. What a powerful assassination technique. For a moment even I thought I was dead meat. After glancing at his 7 tense assailants, Shi Feng took a look at the void shield he had activated. His void shield had already lost more than 30% of its energy. If he had failed to activate the barrier in time, he definitely would have died. It's only a protective shield. I refuse to believe it can last forever. After recovering from his shock, Blade Hand altered his dagger's trajectory and launched another attack. Similarly, the 6 Vultures launched their own assault. The 7 assassins remained cold and unmoving as they attacked Shi Feng's protective shield in a frenzy, disregarding any cost. While inside the magic array, their basic attributes surpassed Shi Feng's. They were also faster than the swordsman. Meanwhile, skills that generated protective shields could only absorb a limited amount of damage. As long as they broke through the protective shield, Shi Feng would die all the same. Daggers and short swords rapidly struck Shi Feng's void shield. Dang. Shi Feng executed Sword's Orbit to defend himself, but each time he blocked an attack, his arms would tremble slightly. In terms of strength, he was no match for the 7 assassins. Meanwhile, the assassins' coordination prevented him from blocking all of their attacks. As a result, his void shield's energy continued to deplete. 60%, 50%, 30%. While void shield's energy drained, the expedition team's situation had taken a turn for the worst. Since Asura's members had halted their advance for a time, Hecate's members were able to land more attacks. As a result, Asura lost members rapidly. Seeing this, Shifeng could not help but sigh. Immediately he activated Blade Liberation, his aura's intensity skyrocketing. The instant Blade Hand and the vultures came into contact with Shifeng's killing ray, they felt their arms go numb. The impact sent them flying and crashing into the magic barrier, which rippled under the force. How did he recover his strength? Blade Hand's expression darkened further as he watched Shifeng, who stood proudly in the center of the magic barrier. He could not understand how Shifeng's attributes had increased by such a large margin. However, Shifeng had no intention of giving Blade Hand's group any time to think as he took the initiative to attack. Dang. Shifeng's attack speed was so high that even Tier 2 players had a hard time keeping up with his swords. Although Blade Hand and the vultures were assassins, not even they were a match for the swordsman's speed. They had to rely on their instincts to block Shifeng's swords. The 7 assassins knew that they were pushing themselves to their limits. Yet, every time their daggers or short swords came into contact with Shifeng's swords, an intense feedback coursed through their arms. The resulting impact was so powerful that they were even forced to retreat by several steps. Eventually they could no longer keep up and were forced to use Vanish, temporarily negating Shifeng's attacks. Using the brief invulnerability, they launched a suicidal attack. The reckless assault instantly shattered Shifeng's void shield and slightly lowered his HP. Seeing that they had finally dealt damage, Blade Hand and the vultures regained a little hope. Immediately, the 7 assassins disregarded defense and launched another reckless assault. However, just as their attacks were about to strike Shifeng, their target split into 2 identical copies. Phantom kill. Blade Hand and the vultures were dumbfounded, but since their brief invulnerability was still active, they thrust their blades at the 2 copies. However, with the 7 assassins' attacks divided and the fact that Shifeng had an absurd amount of HP and defense, the assassins failed to kill either of Shifeng's copies. When the 7 assassins' temporary invulnerability ended, Shifeng and his doppelganger simultaneously activated Shadow Blade, sending 20 strikes flying at the assassins. There was little space for players to move around inside the magic barrier, and as a result, 5 of the 7 assassins were killed instantly. Shifeng and his doppelganger then executed Purgatory Pentaslash, each bombarding the 2 remaining assassins with 5 slashes. The power of each slash grew stronger than the last, and by the time Shifeng and his doppelganger landed their 5th hit, their opponents were paralyzed. Suddenly, a streak of blue light cut down Blade Hand and the last vulture. This time the 2 assassins were powerless. When the streak of light cut through the 2 assassins' leather armor, both were thrown into the magic barrier, staring with widened eyes as they died. They simply could not bring themselves to believe that some commander of a measly adventurer team had turned the tables on Hecate's vultures, who were powerful enough to make the various large guilds tremble with fear. Although Blade Hand wanted to say something, his HP had reached 0. His vision faded to black as his body transformed into a streak of light and disappeared, leaving behind a piece of equipment shortly after. The magic barrier around Shifeng shattered and vanished. Chapter 1777, Scourge. Hellscythe Underslucky Old Cat. Along with the magic barrier's disappearance, Hecate's members, who were slowly closing in on Asura's members, could not help being stunned. Everyone in Hecate knew of the vultures. The group was second only to the guild's pride, the 12 Heavens, in terms of strength. When it came to fame, the vultures were far more renowned than the 12 Heavens because the vultures had killed many people in the upper echelons of first-rate guilds before and even someone in the upper echelon of a super first-rate guild. Moreover, Blade Hand, Hecate's #1 assassin, had even led the assault on Shifeng this time. Yet, after fighting for just a little over 10 seconds, all 7 of the vultures actually got killed. He's not dead even after all that? A hint of fear flashed across Cold Brew's eyes as he watched Shifeng collect the items dropped by Blade Hand and the vultures. Although he had long since known that Shifeng was very strong, he hadn't thought the swordsman was this strong. Gritting his teeth, Cold Brew immediately commanded, "Everyone nearby, listen up. Stop Asura's commander at all costs. He has already used up all his trump cards. We cannot let him get away no matter what. I will reward 4 pieces of level 50 fine gold equipment or 1 level 50 dark gold weapon to whoever manages to kill him." With such strength, if they allowed Shifeng to develop freely, he would undoubtedly become a scourge on Hecate in the future. Only by killing Shifeng once now and damaging his vigor would they be able to disrupt Shifeng's development. Moreover, it wasn't very easy to hunt down and encircle players out in the field. They had succeeded this time only because Shifeng had not been prepared. After today, they definitely wouldn't find another good opportunity like this to strike at Shifeng in the future. Anyhow, the sudden boost in Shifeng's attributes definitely wouldn't last long. Once they outlasted its duration, victory would be theirs for the taking. Kill? Meanwhile, when Hecate's members heard the reward Cold Brew was offering, their eyes promptly turned bloodshot. The guild had precious few level 50 fine gold weapons, much less level 50 dark gold weapons. If they could get their hands on one, it would definitely boost their combat power significantly. Following which, the Hecate members that were previously drawing closer to Asura's members suddenly changed course for Shifeng. Dozens of melee players swarmed Shifeng simultaneously. Spells and skills also flew at him one after another. Seeing this, Shifeng swung Killing Ray lightly. Summon lightning. Suddenly, with Shifeng as the center, countless streaks of lightning spread out into his surroundings. As he was still under the effects of twofold berserk, every player that came into contact with the lightning strikes were killed, their bodies becoming piles of ash on the ground. Before the might of this attack, Hecate's members, who were fired up with bloodlust, instantly cooled down, their charge coming to an abrupt halt. Sure enough, there are still too many people. Shifeng paid no attention to the Hecate members that had stopped approaching him. Instead, he shifted his gaze to his teammates, who were currently fighting a heated battle. Although the Ring of Gospel skills had helped Asura's members significantly, the disadvantage in numbers was simply too massive. Now, less than half of the Asura expedition team remained alive. Shifeng then turned to look at the snow-capped forest a little over 1,000 yards away. I have no choice but to try. Just as Cold Brew had expected, Shifeng was already running on fumes right now. Twofold Berserk was his final trump card. Once he activated it, either his enemies died or he did. If he could get his team into the forest and utilize the terrain, hiding would be a snap. At that time, Hecate's members would no longer be able to surround them easily. Following which, Shifeng used his final trump card, Forbidden Domain. Suddenly, gray fog spread out from Shifeng's body and enveloped the path ahead of him, extending to the snow-capped forest. What's going on? Why can't I use my spells? That's not right. I can't even use my tools now. The Hecate members caught within Forbidden Domain quickly realized that something was wrong and panicked. After all, players relied mainly on skills and spells to do combat. Not being able to use these things was akin to a tiger that had lost both its teeth and claws. Most importantly, the healers could no longer heal themselves or their allies. Everyone, charge forward together with me. Upon seeing Hecate's members rattled, Shifeng quickly gave the order through the team chat and charged at the human wall before him. He then swung Killing Ray at the shields of the MTs blocking his way. With twofold berserk in effect, Shifeng was basically a humanoid monster. Just one attack was enough to send several MTs flying over a dozen yards away. Then he followed up with Dragon Breath, tearing open the path that Hecate's members had refilled just recently. Although Hecate's members did their best to reorganize their formation, having been silenced, they were no different from paper before Shifeng. Every player that stood in his path would be sent flying before transforming into a streak of light and disappearing. Nobody could stop him at all. Asura's members became hot-blooded at the sight of Shifeng harvesting the lives of their enemies so effortlessly. They followed after him with renewed vigor. Although Hecate's members tried to prevent the adventurer team from advancing, the difference in combat power was simply too massive. Without any healing, Hecate's melee players fell quickly to Asura's members in just 2 or 3 moves. In the end, the guild players could only watch as the remains of Asura's expedition team entered the snow-capped forest. Boss Brew, Asura's members have escaped into the forest. Should we continue giving chase? A level 54 ranger asked as he looked at the nearby forest. No, we're retreating. The terrain inside the forest is too complex. Launching a search there will be too difficult. We might even get ambushed by them if we charge in recklessly, Cold Brew said, shaking his head. He then sent a fierce glance at the forest Shifeng had disappeared into as he said, we have plenty of time to deal with them in the future. Frozen City isn't a place they can easily survive in. Following which, Hecate's members all used their return scrolls and returned to Frozen City. Meanwhile, news of Hecate's failed encirclement soon entered the ears of the various guilds of Frozen City and set off quite a commotion among the upper echelons of these guilds. Many guilds in Frozen City even held emergency meetings over this matter. Ah! This Asura adventure team sure is amazing. It actually managed to make Hecate eat a loss. This adventure team is quite good. Have someone try to make contact with it. For a time, the various guilds of Frozen City did their best to find out more about the Asura adventurer team. Hecate was the ruling guild of Frozen City. Although the guild had yet to actually take control of the city, nobody in Frozen City dared to oppose the guild. Now that an adventurer team capable of inflicting such a huge loss on Hecate had appeared, how could the various guilds not feel shocked by this matter? Aside from Frozen City's guilds, the top-ranking adventurer teams of the city also obtained news of Hecate's failure through their own sources. A level 54 assassin suddenly entered one of Frozen City's high-class bars with hurried steps. "Commander, something big just happened." Hecate dispatched 40,000 elites and experts to ambush an adventurer team. The level 54 assassin announced as he took a seat in front of a middle-aged man, who was currently enjoying some wine in a corner of the bar. This middle-aged man was Brilliant Heaven, the commander of the Frost Lion adventurer team, Frozen City's second-best adventurer team. With great enthusiasm, the level 54 assassin continued, "What do you think the outcome was? What else could it be? With a force of 40,000 elites and experts, you can even wipe out some of the large guilds in Frozen City," Brilliant Heaven replied disinterestedly. "You guessed wrong. Hecate failed. I also heard that Hecate lost several thousand members as well," the level 54 assassin said, shaking his head. "Several thousand? Which adventurer team did Hecate target? Even White Soul, the current #1 adventurer team, doesn't have this kind of capability." Brilliant Heaven could not help but be surprised by the assassin's words. "No. Based on some insider information from Hecate, it seems this adventurer team came from another region," the level 54 assassin said. "Another region? What's it called? How many people did they send over? Several tens of thousands?" Brilliant Heaven's curiosity was now piqued despite himself. "It seems the adventurer team is called Asura, and it sent roughly 700 people over this time," the level 54 assassin said after taking another look at the message he received previously. "Moreover, I heard that Asura's commander killed the vultures and Blade Hand all by himself." 700? And their commander killed the vultures and Blade Hand by himself? Upon hearing the assassin's words, Brilliant Heaven could not help wondering whether the assassin was drunk. However, the assassin had spoken very clearly and seriously. "If that is true, then I'm afraid Frozen City will soon have a new ruler." Chapter 1778, Famous. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. After Sherfong got his team away from Hecate, he split the surviving Asura members into small groups and had them enter Frozen City while wearing cloaks, to start collecting information regarding the city. As for Sherfong himself, he and Yenya made their way straight to Frozen City City Hall. "Commander, this city is flourishing. It can already rival the capitals of kingdoms back on the continent of God's domain." Yenya was very surprised as she looked at the street outside through the advanced horse carriage's windows. As they made their way to the city hall, she saw plenty of players hawking their wares on the sidewalks. Unlike Cold Wind City though, the majority of these hawkers were lifestyle players. These players sold level 50 weapons and equipment, and the weakest piece of equipment was bronze rank, while the better ones were even secret silver rank. Such a scene could not be found in Cold Wind City. Also, plenty of player-operated shops lined the streets. Frozen City's prosperity could definitely rival that of a kingdom's capital. Moreover, compared to the level and equipment standard of Cold Wind City's players, the players here were obviously superior. Most of the players on the street were level 52 and were fully geared in level 50 mysterious iron equipment. There were also quite a few level 53 experts sporting multiple pieces of level 50 secret silver equipment. Yenya even spotted some independent players in level 50 fine gold equipment. This place is indeed developed. If comparing purely in terms of lifestyle player standards, Frozen City is far superior to the capitals of kingdoms. As Sherfong looked at the lifestyle players on the sidewalks, he discovered that these lifestyle players were not wearing any guild emblems. Despite not being a member of a guild, they were capable of producing level 50 secret silver equipment. The forging standard of the lifestyle players in Frozen City was much higher than that of the lifestyle players on the main continent. For example, inside Starmoon Kingdom, only the lifestyle players of the Candlelight Trading Firm could produce level 50 secret silver equipment at a feasible cost. By the looks of it, Frozen City should be one of the Ice Crystal World's main cities. Main city? Yenya repeated. This was her first time hearing this term. That's right, a main city. You can think of other worlds as a kingdom or an empire. Although other worlds have not been unified, some cities are the counterparts of kingdom capitals and imperial capitals. These cities are known as main cities. They function as an intersection for neighboring regions. However, other worlds do not have only one main city. Depending on the size of an otherworld, it can have around 3 to 7 main cities. A city as large and as prosperous as Frozen City should be a main city, Shifeng explained. Based on the investigations Asura's members had conducted, Frozen City's player population exceeded 8 million, which was much higher than Cold Wind City's. In fact, Frozen City's player population exceeded even White River City's slightly, which was simply impossible for an ordinary city. In addition, Frozen City had opened a path to 2 other cities just a little while ago. At the same time, the Frozen City region had multiple maps leading to other regions. All this proved that Frozen City was a main city in the Ice Crystal world. Originally, Shifeng had expected to arrive at an ordinary city similar to Cold Wind City. He had never imagined that he would actually land himself in a main city. This came as a pleasant surprise. The importance of an otherworld main city was much greater than that of a kingdom capital or imperial capital on the continent of God's domain. The reason for this was access. Players in most ordinary cities in other worlds had to transit a main city in order to travel to other ordinary cities. On the other hand, players on the continent of God's domain could teleport freely between cities belonging to the same kingdom or empire. Moreover, regions housing ordinary cities had access to only one main city. One could travel to other main cities only via the main city they were connected to. Due to these reasons, the main cities of other worlds were very important. At the same time, the difficulty of taking control of a main city was also much greater. However, once players successfully seized control of a main city, they could monopolize a sizable portion of an otherworld's resources, which also made main cities prime targets for the various large guilds. Now that Shifeng had managed to arrive at Frozen City ahead of the Black Dragon Empire's various large guilds, he had a much better chance of taking control of the city. After riding on the horse carriage for about 20 minutes, Shifeng and Yenya arrived at Frozen City City Hall. Currently, merchant players crowded the main lobby. Some of these merchant players were standing before the front counter and browsing through the shops available for purchase in the city. Others were sitting in the lounge and chatting while waiting for their turn. Did you hear? Hecate ambushed an adventurer team in the Snow Rift just recently. In the end, however, not only did Hecate lose several thousand elite and expert players, but it even let nearly half of the adventurer team get away. Of course, I've heard about it. I also know that the targeted adventurer team is called Asura and that it's an adventurer team that came from Cold Wind City, a city that Hecate is trying to occupy. This Asura adventurer team sure is amazing. It actually managed to deal such a grievous blow to Hecate. I also heard that Asura's commander is an absolute monster that's 3 meters tall and has arms several times thicker than my thighs. He managed to wipe out the vultures and kill several thousand elite and expert members of Hecate all by himself. Even Tier 2 experts are like tofu before him. What a monster. It's no wonder even the vultures got annihilated. Commander, they seem to be talking about you. Yenya, who overheard the conversation of some resting players, giggled as she sneaked a glance at Shifeng. Am I that gigantic? Shifeng could not help being flabbergasted by the conversation of these players. The rumors about him were growing increasingly ridiculous. Hecate's ambush this time had indeed dealt a severe blow to Asura's expedition team. However, Asura had also gained a considerable harvest from the ambush, and this harvest came in the form of free promotion. After all, Hecate had caused quite a commotion when it dispatched an army of 40,000 players to hunt a single adventurer team. The fact that the guild returned in failure only served to garner even more attention from the general populace. At this point, practically every player in Frozen City had heard about the Asura adventurer team already. After Shifeng arrived on the second-floor hall of the city hall, he revealed his city protector title. Lord Protector, how may I be of service to you today? An NPC senior administrator promptly walked over to greet Shifeng. I wish to purchase a plot of land in the city, Shifeng said. Alright, these are the available lands in our city right now, the senior administrator said as he took out a map of Frozen City. Green and red markers dotted the map, with the green markers signifying ownerless lands, and the red markers signifying owned lands. Looking at the city map, Shifeng could not help but smile. Sure enough, the lands around that street are still untouched, Shifeng thought as he looked at a section of the city that was all green. Labeled the Old City District, this section was located in the outer area of the city, and it would seem that nobody was interested in purchasing the lands there. After all this time since the launch of God's Domain, the important lands of NPC cities, whether on the main continent of God's Domain or in other worlds, had already been bought by the various guilds. No good locations would be left unclaimed. However, the NPC cities in other worlds were slightly different, particularly the old city districts of the main cities. In other worlds, only main cities had access to other main cities. This was like how teleportation between countries was limited to the capitals. Players needed to travel to the capital in order to teleport to another country. However, the way this access was gained wasn't by opening up a path in a particular map but by activating the air routes between cities. Once the air routes were activated, players could then ride a flying ship from one main city to another. These flying ships would dock at the main city's old city districts, where the main cities would construct an airport. In the past, the various large guilds had been ignorant of this fact. As a result, some merchant players that had gambled their money on the lands of the old city districts ended up making a fortune for themselves. Currently, practically all the lands around the area reserved for the future airport were ownerless. This was a massive business opportunity for Shurfeng. Lord Protector, may I know which plot of land you wish to buy? I can also give you a detailed introduction of the lands available here, the senior administrator asked when he saw Shurfeng remaining unresponsive for quite some time. No need for introductions. I want every plot of land in this area, Shurfeng said as he pointed at the several streets of the old city district. Chapter 1779. Difference between cities. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. Everything? The NPC senior administrator couldn't help but ask, flabbergasted. Lord Protector, there are a total of 14 plots of land on these streets. Are you sure you want all of them? Even Yenya gave Shurfeng an astonished look, her jaw dropping. She simply could not fathom what Shurfeng was trying to do. Although the lands in the old city district were much cheaper than the lands in the central district, purchasing all 14 plots would still cost a fortune. Moreover, the old city district was in a remote area of the city. Even now, nobody had bothered to purchase any of those lands. One could easily see just how poor the location was. Just finding a tenant might be impossible. That's right. I want all of them. Shurfeng nodded. All right, the total for the 14 plots of land comes to 31,500 gold. After making sure that Shurfeng wanted to buy old city district's lands, the senior administrator excitedly calculated the total price and handed Shurfeng a list. Examining this list, Shurfeng noticed that the cheapest plot cost over 2,000 gold. These lands were slightly more expensive than those in the outskirts of a kingdom's capital city. However, once the air routes between main cities opened to the public, these lands would become dozens of times more valuable. Even if he didn't have a use for these lands, he could rent them out and make a fortune. Naturally, he couldn't miss the opportunity to purchase these lands. After ensuring that everything was in order, Shurfeng completed the payment. At this stage of the game, 31,500 gold was a massive sum even to a first-rate guild. To Shurfeng, however, this amount was nothing. Shurfeng had already sent Solitary 9 with the rare materials, which the Asura Adventurer team and the Adventurer Alliance had gathered, to the Candlelight trading firm. On his return, Solitary 9 had brought back plenty of items from Candlelight, such as stamina potions, ice resistance armor kits, and other items that could not be found in Cold Wind City to sell or put up for trade for the Adventurer Alliance. Cold Wind City's players preferred to purchase their items with coins rather than trade rare materials for items. Hence, he had earned quite a lot of coins recently. Thus far, Solitary 9 had made 2 trips to White River City. His first trip had netted them over 20,000 gold. On his second trip, which had been several days later, Candlelight was far more prepared as it had obtained the massive stock of rare materials. As a result, the items Solitary 9 had returned to Cold Wind City with on his second trip had netted them over 60,000 gold in profit. Now Shurfeng's pockets were heavy with coins. It was a pity that Asura and Zero Wing couldn't afford such shipments every day. After all, there were only so many players in Cold Wind City. There was a limit to the market's appetite. By Shurfeng's estimates, it would take the city's players at least 4 to 5 days to digest all of the items. In other words, he could only earn a fortune once every 4 or 5 days. Before Shurfeng had left Cold Wind City, he had spent 10,000 gold on the teleportation gate's construction. He had also left 10,000 gold behind for Asura and the Adventurer Alliance's development. He still had over 60,000 gold on hand. However, while 60,000 gold might seem significant, it wasn't enough for Shifeng to accomplish anything. He needed a lot more than this paltry amount. Aside from Cold Wind City's development, Shifeng was responsible for the development costs of Zero Wings Branch Guild, Silverwing Town, and the Lost Town in the Boneless Land, all of which required a massive amount of funds. This was especially true for Silverwing Town and the Lost Town. Silverwing Town was located beside a primordial divine ruin that was connected to Primordial City. It was a strategic location that could constantly bring in combat techniques and resources, which could aid players in their promotion quests. As for the Lost Town, it was a holy land that could help players grasp the realms of truth. It would help Zero Wing nurture countless experts for the future. These two towns were the foundations necessary for Zero Wing to become a super guild, and they needed to be fortified as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the various superpowers realized the value of these two towns, they would do everything they could to steal them from Zero Wing. This was also why Shifeng had told no one about the Lost Town. With how large Zero Wing had grown, there were many spies within the guild. The risk of leaking information was too great in God's domain. The strong preyed on the weak. On the off chance that the various superpowers discovered the Lost Town's ability, Zero Wing's current strength wouldn't be enough to defend the town from the claws of multiple superpowers. It was absolutely necessary that Shifeng fortify the two towns as soon as possible, and the fastest way to do so required spending money to earn even more. Purchasing these 14 plots of land was his plan's first steps. After purchasing these 14 plots of land, Shifeng chose the largest one and spent 3,000 gold to build a luxurious adventurer residence, which would serve as Asura's base in this city. He then selected another 5 plots of land and spent a total of 5,000 gold to build high-end shops. Shifeng intended to use these shops as temporary warehouses. Frozen City had far more residential players than Cold Wind City, and the resources these players possessed were doubtlessly superior to those in Cold Wind City in both quantity and quality. After making the necessary preparations, Shifeng went on to Frozen City's official forums and published a post as the Asura Adventurer Team's commander. The Adventurer Alliance is currently recruiting in Frozen City. We offer excellent benefits with no restrictions. Strong, capable players can even join the Asura Adventurer Team directly. The moment this post went public, many players that were interested in the Asura Adventurer Team clicked on it out of curiosity. Amazing. Truly amazing. What? We can even purchase level 50 fine gold set equipment. Quick look. We can actually purchase combat techniques in the Adventurer Alliance. There are also ice resistance gemstones among the exchangeable items. This Asura Adventurer Team is too generous. Does Asura plan to gather strength for a war against Hecate? Is this for real? If it's true, I'll join the Adventurer Alliance right away. Magic Light Set, here I come. The post Shifeng had uploaded contained information that introduced the Adventurer Alliance's benefits. To attract more players to join, he had even used the Magic Light Set and combat techniques as bait. Of course, not only did items like the Magic Light Set require a large number of Adventurer Alliance points, but they also required a sufficient number of soul-dissolving flowers. Shortly after Shifeng's post went live, the independent players throughout the entire Frozen City went into an uproar. Every one of these independent players rushed toward Asura's residence. Although the majority of them did not have soul-dissolving flowers, they were still curious to find out whether the Asura Adventurer Team's claim was true, wanting to confirm the situation with their own eyes. Before 10 minutes had even passed, over 10,000 independent players had crowded around Asura's residence, seeking to join the Adventurer Alliance. They packed the street outside the residence, forcing Asura's members to step up and maintain order. When Frozen City's independent players joined the Adventurer Alliance and saw the exchange list in the main lobby, they were ecstatic. The Magic Light Set was on the list as promised, and there were actually 3 available. After getting their fill of the Magic Light Set, the independent players in the lobby turned their bloodshot eyes toward the ice resistance gemstones that increased one's ice resistance by 5 points. They immediately began to bid on the gemstones. Frozen City had far more resources than Cold Wind City, especially when it came to magic crystals. This was because Frozen City had an Asura mode regional dungeon in its area. Players could visit the regional dungeon to harvest the magic crystals they needed. Hence, Frozen City's players had slightly more magic crystals in their possession than Cold Wind City's players. Very quickly, the prices for the ice resistance gemstones shot up to 7 magic crystals, with some even reaching 8. Magic crystals. Roughly 30 minutes later, the 5,000 5-point gemstones Shifeng had brought from Cold Wind City had sold out. Frozen City's appetite for the ice resistance gemstones was many times stronger than Cold Wind City's. The sales had also earned Shifeng over 35,700 magic crystals. Realizing that demand for the gemstones was so high here, Shifeng posted 10,000 6-point gemstones for sale as well, with their minimum price set at 7 magic crystals. However, instead of selling batches of 1,000 at a time as he had before, he only sold the 6-point gemstones in batches of 200 and 300. To Shifeng's surprise, all 3 magic light sets had sold roughly 3 hours after he had established the Adventurer Alliance in Frozen City, netting him 18 soul-dissolving flowers. Despite all of his efforts to collect the soul-dissolving flower in Cold Wind City, he had only collected 6 stalks, yet he had secured 18 stalks only 3 hours after arriving in Frozen City. The difference between the two cities was greater than he had imagined. Although the magic light sets had likely been purchased by players from large guilds, potentially adding to these guilds' strength, Shifeng didn't care. After all, he had finally secured the 20 soul-dissolving flowers. After Shifeng withdrew the 18 soul-dissolving flowers from Asura's warehouse, he nearly lost himself to his excitement and clicked to remove the curse on the philosopher's hand. Fortunately, he managed to suppress his elation and found a private room in the residence. Only after ensuring that he was alone did he retrieve the crystalline hand from his bag. System, it has been detected that you have 20 soul-dissolving flowers. Do you wish to remove the curse on the philosopher's hand? Seeing the system notification, Shifeng clicked accept without hesitation. Chapter 1780, Initial Unsealing of a Legendary Item. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. The instant Shifeng chose to remove the curse, the crystalline, skeletal hand released a purplish gold glow that lit up the entire room. The mana density in the room also started to rise at a rapid rate. Amazing. So, this is the power of the philosopher's hand? Shifeng was unprecedentedly calm as a white mist surrounded him. Shortly after, the mist-turned mana gradually took liquid form. A globe of liquid mana then formed before Shifeng. A moment later, a scene began to play in the mana globe. The footage showed a world enveloped in fire. The world's sky was covered in dense, dark clouds, and from time to time, a tower of flame would rise into the sky. Meanwhile, white flames danced on flowing, white-hot magma in this world's center. The flames were so hot that they even distorted space around them. However, Shifeng could faintly see a gigantic gate in the center of the white-hot flames. In addition, a massive, crimson figure paced inside the flames. The figure wielded a trident that seemed to be the ruler of the surrounding flames. After 1 minute of the footage, it disappeared. The room gradually returned to its original state, and the philosopher's hand quietly hovered before Shifeng. However, the item was now decorated in carved, divine runes. The philosopher's hand's attributes had also undergone significant changes. Cursed Philosopher's Hand, Legendary Rank Item. As the creator of the philosopher's hand failed to complete his wish before death, the creator's soul had attached itself to the philosopher's hand and cursed it to lose all of its power. As soul-dissolving flowers had been used on the philosopher's hand, the creator's soul had received soul guidance. As a result, the curse has been weakened slightly. Additional skill dash. Philosopher's Soul offers players guidance for 1 hour when crafting items. Cooldown 3 hours. What an amazing skill. I've only partially removed the curse, yet the philosopher's hand has gained such a heaven-defying skill. It's no wonder why it had been known as an alchemy treasure. Shifeng was astonished when he saw the updated attribute panel. Most likely, the effects of Philosopher's Soul could rival even the value of a meditation potion. However, the materials needed to produce the meditation potion were incomparably valuable, and the potion itself was impossible to mass-produce. Philosopher's Soul, on the other hand, was a skill that could be used indefinitely. Although the skill could only be used to help lifestyle players craft items, not to learn combat techniques like the meditation potion, it was still a precious resource. If the public discovered this skill, guilds throughout the game would hunt Shifeng down to steal it. In God's domain, players had to invent items, which involved a process of trial and error to become lifestyle masters. It would take a very long time for a lifestyle player to reach the master rank. However, if one had some guidance, inventing an item would become easier. This would help lifestyle players who were just a small step away from becoming a master, cross the final threshold. After just partially dissolving the curse on the philosopher's hand, it offered such a powerful skill. It was no wonder why Kingdom Sword had developed its trading firm to the forefront of the Dark Knight Empire within a short time. After all, lifestyle masters were the core competitive power of a trading firm. This outcome made Shifeng even more eager to complete this epic ranked main storyline quest and obtain the complete Philosopher's Hand. However, the World Forest location is a big problem. As Shifeng recalled the scene the mana ball had displayed, frowning. Current players were likely unfamiliar with the Flaming World and would take a very long time to find it, but the moment Shifeng, who was incredibly familiar with God's domain, had laid eyes on the World of Fire, the massive crimson monster, and the trident it wielded, he knew where it was. The Flame Demon's Valley. It was a neutral map that was home to flame demons. The gigantic monster in the recording was, in fact, the Flame Demon King, the Flame Demon's Valley's final boss. As the Flame Demon's Valley was rich in magic crystals and source fire ore, it had been highly contested over by the various large guilds in the past. The Flame Demon King, in particular, was one of the few world bosses available at this stage of the game. The Flame Demon King's first kill awarded fragmented legendary items and guild residence promotion orders. As a result, God's domain's various superpowers had dispatched large armies to raid it. Unfortunately, every guild that had tried to raid the world boss had returned in failure. The Flame Demon King had only been level 83 back then. The various superpowers expedition team members had, on average, been over level 80. The expedition teams also consisted of Tier 2 players, yet they hadn't been powerful enough to stand against the Flame Demon King's strength. Every expedition team had been annihilated. Only after players had reached level 100 and obtained their Tier 3 classes did they finally defeat the Flame Demon King. Meanwhile, the main reason that level 80+ players had failed to defeat the Demon King was the Flame Demon's Valley's intense environment. The area the Flame Demon King occupied was so hot that players would rapidly lose HP even in full fire resistance equipment and with advanced fire resistance potions. When a team battled the Flame Demon King, the team's healers constantly had to heal every member of their team. One could easily imagine the results of such a disadvantageous battle. However, not only would players' basic attributes and physique improve considerably after reaching Tier 3, but their resistances would also undergo a qualitative transformation. This was also the greatest difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 players. This was why players had been able to defeat this boss after reaching Tier 3. Although Shifeng's goal only consisted of traveling to the World Forest and activating the World Gate, not killing the Flame Demon King, the area's scorching fire was no laughing matter. Even if he consumed an advanced fire resistance potion, he wouldn't last more than 20 seconds in the severe environment without a healer. Furthermore, the Flame Demon King wouldn't just sit by and watch him approach the World Gate. If he factored in the Flame Demon King's interference, he wouldn't survive for more than a few seconds. Then how was he supposed to activate the World Gate? It seems that I'll have to find a way to increase my fire resistance. No matter how Shifeng thought about it, the only way he could activate the World Gate and complete his quest as soon as possible was to raise his fire resistance. Moreover, just increasing his fire resistance wouldn't do. He needed to help improve enough players to form a 20-man team at the very least. Otherwise, he wouldn't accomplish anything even if he was immune to the map's heat with the Flame Demon King harassing him. He needed others to distract the Flame Demon King while he activated the World Gate. At the moment, Shifeng could only think of 3 methods to improve a player's fire resistance. The first method was to wear fire resistance equipment, the second involved fire resistance potions, and the last required raising one's tier. The last option was unrealistic. Hence, he could only rely on the first and second method. Creating advanced fire resistance potions was not a problem for the Candlelight trading firm. The problem now lay in how to acquire a large stock of fire resistance equipment. Moreover, the fire resistance equipment in question had to provide a significant amount of fire resistance. Otherwise, players wouldn't be able to survive in the Flame Demon King's abode. Trying to secure a large stock of powerful fire resistance equipment within a short time was unrealistic at this stage of the game. This was because mainstream players were just starting to cross the level 50 threshold. Team dungeons that dropped resistance equipment were still extremely rare. Hence, resistance equipment was very rare at this level, much less excellent resistance equipment. Only after players reached level 70 and above would resistance equipment start to become available in greater quantities. There's no other choice. I can only return and have Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow prioritize team dungeons that drop fire resistance equipment. Shifeng sighed. Following which, Shi Feng stored the philosopher's hand and called Yenya over to discuss the works that needed to be done in Frozen City after he left the ice crystal world. He then filled his bag with the 60,000 magic crystals, which he had earned through the ice resistance gemstones that provided +6 ice resistance, and a large amount of rare materials he had acquired from Frozen City and Cold Wind City. He then used a guild transfer scroll and teleported back to the continent of God's domain. Chapter 1781, Tremendous Changes. Hellscythe Lucky Old Cat. Starmoon Kingdom, Zero Wing City. When Shi Feng entered the guild hall's first floor hall, he noticed that the main hall was crowded with guild members either eagerly picking up a quest or exchanging for an item from the guild warehouse. With a glance, he noticed that the players present inside the hall were all level 51 and above. Some Tier 2 players sporting Zero Wing's core member emblem were forming guild teams to raid team dungeons. The entire first floor hall bustled with prosperity. Things here were completely different from before he left for the Ice Crystal world. After observing the situation in the guild hall for a short while, Shi Feng hurried to the candlelight trading firm. As he rode through the streets of Zero Wing City on an advanced horse carriage, he noticed that there were many more players in the city than before, especially merchant players. In addition, he also saw quite a lot of leisure players wearing virtual clothing designed and made by real-world companies. It was obvious that players had started treating Zero Wing City as a place where they could enjoy life. Aside from merchant players and leisure players, there was also a marked increase in expert players in the city. Just within his field of vision alone right now, Shi Feng already spotted several dozen level 53 and above expert players and even 2 extremely rare Tier 2 players. This was a situation that could not be found even in Frozen City. However, the greatest change to Zero Wing City was the horse carriages on the streets. Convoys of carriages frequently drove past Shi Feng. These convoys mostly belonged to NPC merchant caravans, the presence of which also represented the prosperity of a city. And the more there were of such caravans inside a city, the more prosperous a city was. After Zero Wing City's prosperity reached a certain degree, so long as the city met certain safety requirements, it could get promoted from a basic city to an intermediate city. In Shi Feng's opinion, Zero Wing City's promotion was imminent. If a guild wished to promote its basic city to an intermediate city, the city needed sufficient popularity. The presence of NPC merchants on the streets was a good benchmark for a city's popularity, something which the various large guilds in the past had discovered after collecting sample information from multiple guild cities. Normally, when half of the merchant caravans present in the city were made up of advanced transport carriages, a basic city already possessed sufficient popularity to become an intermediate city. Meanwhile, roughly 1/3 of the merchant-owned carriages present inside Zero Wing City were advanced transport carriages. The city was not far off from attaining the needed popularity. Zero Wing City's development speed thoroughly exceeded Shi Feng's expectations. What with the 4 towers of elements in Zero Wing City, it already fulfilled the security requirements to become an intermediate city. In other words, so long as Zero Wing City achieved sufficient popularity, it could immediately be promoted to an intermediate city. It would be great if Silverwing Town and the Lost Town could get promoted as quickly. Shi Feng could not help but sigh ruefully as he looked at the streets through his carriage's window. Being Starmoon Kingdom's first guild city provided Zero Wing City with a massive advantage. With the additional benefit of an advanced defensive construction like the 4 towers of elements, it was basically impossible to stop Zero Wing City from developing rapidly. On the other hand, Silverwing Town and the Lost Town, which were both located in neutral maps, did not possess such an advantage. After riding on the horse carriage for about 10 minutes, Shi Feng arrived before the candlelight trading firm, which was as lively as ever. Quite a number of lifestyle players were lined up on one side of the shop waiting to apply to join Candlelight. Guild leader, you're back. Melancholic Smile, who was currently busy handling recruitment procedures on the second floor hall, was pleasantly surprised to see Shi Feng. MHM. What's the situation in Zero Wing City and Candlelight right now? Shi Feng asked when he saw Melancholic Smile approaching him. When he noticed the Master Forger's insignia pinned on her chest, he could not help his surprise, asking, "You got promoted to Master already?" "I became a Master Forger just yesterday. It is all thanks to the rare materials you had Solitary 9 and the others deliver. Those materials allowed me to carry out many experiments. In the end, I managed to create an entirely new piece of equipment," Melancholic Smile said. However, despite her humble words, Melancholic Smile still felt a little proud of herself. After all, the threshold of master was a huge one to cross. At this point in time, tons of lifestyle players were still stuck at the advanced rank, nowhere close to creating a new item. Since you've already been promoted to a master forger, I'll hand over these designs to you, Shifeng said, taking out a few designs from his bag. He had obtained these designs from the snow ruin. One of these designs was for the level 50 dark gold weapon Sockham's blade, one was for level 50 fine gold ranked plate armor armguards, and one was for level 50 dark gold ranked cloth armor robes. Upon taking a closer look at these designs, Melancholic's smile immediately fell into a daze, her hands gripping the designs for Sockham's blade and the fine gold ranked armguards tightly. Guild leader, can I really learn these? She asked excitedly. If these were merely secret silver ranked forging designs, she wouldn't have batted an eye at them. However, it was a different story for level 50 fine gold and dark gold ranked designs because forging items of such quality required completely different techniques and the proper matching of materials to unleash the full potential of the materials used. In short, the rank of a forged weapon or equipment was determined by a forger's capability to utilize the materials involved. If a forger was capable of forging only bronze and mysterious iron-ranked weapons and equipment, then their ability to unleash the potential of raw materials was only at a rudimentary level. Weapons and equipment at the dark gold rank, on the other hand, could be considered works of art. At this rank, the matching of materials was practically at a perfect level. Meanwhile, if players wished to create such works of art of their own, they needed to keep learning level 50 plus fine gold and dark gold ranked forging designs. However, designs of such rank were extremely rare and difficult to obtain. Thus far, aside from the fine gold rank and above designs from the Holy City of Titan, the Candlelight trading firm did not possess any other high-ranking designs. Of course, if Candlelight has a tailor who has reached the master rank, then that robe design will be theirs, Shifeng said, chuckling. This situation made him realize that, aside from various rare materials, he could also get high-ranking designs for lifestyle players from the Ice Crystal world. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have Solitary 9 transfer some of the high-ranking designs they acquired at the Ice Crystal world. Thank you, guild leader. I'll make sure to produce weapons and equipment that will be to your satisfaction very quickly. Melancholic's smile was brimming with joy as she stored the designs. Afterward, she started reporting on Zero Wing's current affairs to Shifeng. Thanks to Zero Wing City and Silverwing Town, Zero Wing's development was zooming along. The guild already had over 240,000 elite members and 7,000 expert members. Those numbers could already rival those of first-rate guilds. With Zero Wing City's player population having exceeded 5 million during this period, it was close to catching up to White River City. Just the entrance fees collected daily provided massive income to the guild. Only as the guild's member count increased, the guild's expenditures likewise increased. Moreover, the Zero Wing members developing over at Silverwing Town were constantly ambushed and harassed by the Evil God's Temple and dark players. This forced the guild to construct more defensive structures in Silverwing Town, as well as pay compensation to members that got killed in battle. Right now, the guild was basically investing every coin it earned back into itself. As a result, it was just barely running properly right now. However, it was also thanks to Silverwing Town that Zero Wing was gaining a bountiful harvest from the primordial divine ruin. The guild was now sending many more players into the ruin. After hearing Melancholic Smile's report, Shifeng, who had been cudgeling his brain over the collection of fire resistance equipment, relaxed considerably. Now that the guild had so many experts, having a portion of them focus specifically on collecting fire resistance equipment would not hamper the guild's operation. At the very least, it would not affect the main force's development. As for funding, that was not a problem at all. Afterward, Shifeng emptied the rare materials inside his bag and stacked them up into miniature mountains inside Candlelight's warehouse. The sight of the materials Shifeng took out rendered Melancholic's smile speechless. The amount of materials greatly exceeded the total amount that Solitary 9's group had brought over in 2 trips. With so many rare materials, they could earn a fortune just by selling the materials directly. If they turned these materials into products and sold them, they would earn even more. After all, many of these materials were suitable for producing level 50 weapons and equipment at the secret silver rank and above. If they made these weapons and equipment and sold them, they would rake in a ridiculous amount of money. Right, guild leader, I have an item here that the secret pavilion sent over. Originally, the secret pavilion's representatives stated that they had to hand it over to you in person. However, since you weren't around after they made several visits, they ended up giving up and passed it to me for safekeeping instead, melancholic smile said. She then took out a pitch-black gift box from her bag and handed it to Shifeng. An item from the secret pavilion? After receiving the gift box, Shifeng immediately opened it out of curiosity. Chapter 1782, Raising Funds. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. When Shifeng tapped on the item, the exquisite gift box opened slowly. Inside the gift box was an exquisite golden card. Embossed on the card were the words, Secret Pavilion Auction Invitation Card. The invitation card for the Secret Pavilion's auction? Shifeng took out the card to inspect its attribute panel. This is interesting. Recorded on the card's attribute panel was the address for the venue of the Secret Pavilion's internal auction. The card also served as an electronic pass that allowed entry into the auction. Meanwhile, the card could allow up to 5 people to participate in the auction. Shifeng knew very clearly what an internal auction hosted by the Secret Pavilion entailed. These internal auctions were a hub of high-class items. Moreover, the auctions weren't limited to items found in God's domain. Real-world items that could be of help to one's progression in the game would also be available. During the first 2 years after God's domain's launch, not even the Dark Arena's Dark Auction could have compared to the Secret Pavilion's internal auction. Epic items were commonplace in these internal auctions, not worth mentioning. More importantly, the auction would include fragmented legendary items and clues that could lead to legendary items. The internal auction also offered a massive quantity of items. Sometimes, the internal auctions would last 2 days due to so many items for sale. As long as one attended, they could reap a considerable harvest. For Shifeng, this auction's timing could not be more perfect. He currently needed a large stock of high-quality fire resistance equipment, and the Secret Pavilion, which reached all across the continent of God's domain, definitely had some fire resistance equipment to sell. Purchasing some during this auction would save him a lot of time and effort. Taking a look at the auction's date, he noticed that it would be held in 4 days. He still had time to prepare. Later, Shifeng gathered Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow to inform them of the Secret Pavilion's invitation. If it were merely a normal auction, he might not have bothered to notify these two, but this was a Secret Pavilion internal auction. Many of God's domain's outstanding experts would be there due to the auction's tradition. To prevent the participating superpowers from monopolizing the finale items, leaving nothing for the other powers, the Secret Pavilion would hold a competition to decide how many of the finale items each power could purchase. Of course, one could refuse to take part in the competition, but they'd be limited to 2 or 3 of the finale items at most. To avoid missing out on anything precious, the various participating powers would show some effort in the competition. After all, the Secret Pavilion's finale items were all extraordinary. Of course, not just anybody could participate in this competition. Only 25-year-olds and younger could participate. If old monsters were allowed to take part, then up-and-coming powers might as well sit still and do nothing. Because of this, the various powers usually brought their outstanding experts to the internal auction. Although these experts were relatively unknown in the current God's domain, they would definitely become famous figures in the future. As Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow were Zero Wings Vice Guild leaders, it was best to let them keep an eye out for these up-and-coming experts. After all, nobody knew if these up-and-coming experts would become enemies in the future. When Aqua Rose saw the invitation card in Shifeng's hand, she stared with wide, surprised eyes. "Guild leader, you're too awesome. You actually received a gold invitation card. I've heard that the Secret Pavilion has only distributed 50 gold cards this time," Aqua Rose said in admiration. The Secret Pavilion's internal auction was a grand event in the virtual gaming world. Even veteran first-rate guilds like Twilight Echo would only receive a silver invitation card. Meanwhile, those with a gold card would enjoy a massive loan from the Secret Pavilion. Even if one attended the event with empty pockets, they could use the gold card to purchase some items, paying their bill several days later. This provided a massive advantage in the auction. The Secret Pavilion had distributed such gold cards to prevent the various superpowers from casually bidding on finale items and winning them by default or for a very low price. Aqua Rose found it truly hard to believe that Shifeng had actually received a gold card. They've only sent out 50? Shifeng could not help but take another look at the invitation card. During his previous life, he had never participated in any of the Secret Pavilion's internal auctions since Shadow hadn't qualified for an invitation. He had only heard details about the internal auction from other guilds. He certainly hadn't expected the secret pavilion to send Zero Wing such a high-ranked invitation card. Guild leader, can I bring a friend to the auction as well? Aqua Rose asked hesitantly. Depending on the type of invitation card one received, players could bring a certain number of people with them. Bronze cards, the most common invitation cards, only granted entry to 2 people, and silver cards granted entry to 3 people. Only gold cards granted entry to 5 people. Sure. We have plenty of slots in any case, Shifeng answered. He had only intended to bring Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow to the auction. No one else really mattered. They were only going to get a glimpse at the various major powers' up-and-coming experts. This information would only be useful to management-level figures in Zero Wing. Bringing guild experts wouldn't benefit the guild. On the contrary, he would be wasting his experts' time. Thank you, guild leader, Aqua Rose said joyfully. Shifeng, Aqua Rose, and Gentle Snow agreed on a specific time to meet up at the internal auctions venue in the real world. Before this, though, Shifeng had the 2 of them lead a team of their own to raid specific team dungeons to acquire some fire resistance equipment. As for Shifeng, he did his best to collect funds. The secret pavilion's internal auction used 3 different currencies. The first equals was credits, which was also the most preferred currency of the various superpowers, the second was in-game coins, and the third currency was magic crystals. Currently, Zero Wing severely lacked credits. Hence, that only left the option of paying with coins and magic crystals. Fortunately, the secret pavilion preferred magic crystals and coins. Hence, during the auction, magic crystals and coins would have a priority over credits. However, Shifeng had no intention of purchasing items using magic crystals since they weren't easy to obtain. Moreover, Zero Wing currently needed a lot more magic crystals to sustain its operation compared to other guilds. Hence, he would have to rely on his coins. Shifeng had spent 3 full days cooped up inside one of Candlelight's special forging rooms, constantly producing advanced mana armor kits. Even at this stage of the game, advanced mana armor kits were still highly sought after. There simply weren't enough to satisfy market demand. However, Shifeng hadn't had much time to craft the kits, so supply hadn't increased. Now, not only could he use these advanced mana armor kits to make money, but he could also use them to increase his forging proficiency. 100,000 proficiency points were required for a basic master forger to become an intermediate master forger. Only after a basic master forger had the required forging proficiency and created the necessary number of weapons or equipment could they become an intermediate master forger. Producing both the Bronze Guardian Puppet and the Hell Chariot required an intermediate master forger. Between the Bronze Guardian Puppet and the Hell Chariot, it was easier to acquire the necessary materials and manpower to craft the Hell Chariot. If Candlelight could produce Hell Chariots, it would be of immense help to Zero Wing. Aside from Shifeng, the only basic master forger in the Candlelight trading firm was Melancholic Smile. However, as Melancholic Smile had just reached that rank, she would need some time to become an intermediate master forger. The best candidate to become an intermediate forger right now was Shifeng himself. While Shifeng had worked to maximize his coin profits, he had Melancholic Smile sell some of the less important rare materials they had in stock. Since the various large guilds were so eager to acquire these rare materials, they could sell for a high price. However, based on the latest market trends, Shifeng could sense that these guilds were trying to save their funds, likely due to the secret pavilion's upcoming auction. Some guilds were even selling strategic resources to raise funds. This caused the various large guilds throughout God's domain to sense the impending arrival of a storm. Only small guilds and powers remained ignorant about the situation. Some minor powers even felt lucky that they had been able to purchase quite a few items they normally couldn't find. After the advanced mana armor kits and rare materials had sold, Shifeng had earned over 80,000 gold. Including some of the coins Zero Wing City and Stone Forest Town generated, Shifeng had a total of 124,000 gold coins in his bag. This was definitely enough to inspire awe in any first-rate guild. This should be enough. After taking a look at the time, Shifeng chose to log out and head to the secret pavilion's internal auction. Chapter 1783, Secret Pavilion Auction. Hellscythe Lucky Old Cat. Tianyuan City, Secret Pavilion Branch. The branch headquarters was a 181-story tall building that stood in the city's business district. The area the building occupied could fit a stadium that could accommodate 100,000 people. It was one of the most iconic buildings in the entire city. It was also where countless gamers wished to work. Currently, Curious passers-by had gathered on the street outside of the building. This was because today the secret pavilion branch, which generally saw little traffic, was quite lively. One luxury hovercar after another slid to a stop before the building's entrance, with easily over 100 in line. The crowd also gaped in shock when they saw the individuals who alighted from these hovercars. Isn't that 1,000 Miles, the Vice Guild leader of the super first-rate guild Miracle? Why is he at Secret Pavilion's branch? Look, that is Cleansed Rue, the Vice Guild leader of the first-rate Guild 100 Flowers Pavilion. She is so beautiful. Even the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 9 Dragons Emperor is here. What's going on? Why have the upper echelons of so many powerful guilds come to the Secret Pavilion's branch? I get it. The Secret Pavilion must be holding an internal auction today. The auction is so grand this time though. So many guilds have been invited. I'm getting goosebumps from seeing so many of God's Domain's VIPs. It would be great if I could join the auction just once. The crowd was relatively familiar with the people that had stepped out of the luxury hovercars. The virtual gaming world had already solidified its position in society. Large gaming guilds' upper echelons were far more famous than celebrity singers or movie stars among the general populace. Moreover, since God's Domain had gained so much popularity throughout the world, many people had started to pay attention to the virtual gaming world's matters. As the crowd watched one guild VIP enter the Secret Pavilion's branch headquarters after another, awe and admiration filled their hearts. Inwardly, they hoped that one day they too could take part in such a grand event instead of being a silent spectator. Sure enough, the rumors were true. The Secret Pavilion has gone all out this time. It has invited so many major corporations. 1,000 Miles, who stood in a corner of the branch headquarters' main lobby, revealed a smile as he watched the VIPs enter the building. Commander, if that is true, then we'll be in a tight spot. Based on our investigations, plenty of major corporations will be participating. I'm afraid that these corporations will compete with us over that item, a beautiful woman in a dark purple one-piece said, frowning. If Sure Feng were present right now, not even he would have guessed this beauty to be Silent March, the vice commander of Miracle's Purgatory Legion. She was far more charming and intellectual than her appearance in the game. We might not be a match for these corporations in terms of financial strength, but when it comes to resources in God's Domain, Miracle doesn't need to fear anyone. They won't necessarily win that item, 1,000 Miles said, smiling as he eyed the dozen or so corporation representatives conversing in the lobby. This internal auction was indeed much grander than before. Usually, major corporations that weren't related to the virtual gaming world didn't make an appearance. Not even the dark auction could lure these representatives. While the various VIPs in the brilliant lobby chatted, a group of 5 entered the building. The group consisted of 4 women and 1 man, and compared to the other participants, the man appeared average at best. Nobody would bat an eye at him if he walked past. However, 2 of the women beside him immediately attracted a lot of attention. One of these women radiated a cold, sacred feeling, her body akin to perfection itself. As for the other woman, she was radiant with an exquisite form. These women's smiles were so charming that others were unconsciously attracted. These women were none other than Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, both appearing as they did in God's Domain. However, when Sure Feng actually met the 2 in person, he had been slightly surprised. Although there were many great beauties in the lobby, they were no match for Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. As for the other 2 women in Sure Feng's group, one was his assistant, Liang Jing, while the other was Aqua Rose's so-called friend. In reality though, this woman was Aqua Rose's elder cousin, and she looked quite similar to Aqua Rose. Although this female cousin wasn't quite as beautiful as Aqua Rose, she radiated a mature, wise feeling. There are so many guilds here. Aqua Rose quietly exclaimed. After a brief glance at the people in the lobby, she noticed that many were celebrities in God's Domain. There are also quite a few corporate representatives. The Secret Pavilion's capabilities are quite impressive, Gentle Snow added, a hint of admiration in her eyes as she surveyed the room. Although some auctions in God's Domain could attract a few major corporations, these auctions definitely weren't as successful as the Secret Pavilion's internal auction. After watching the room for a moment, Gentle Snow had noticed 6 major corporations that were frequently on the news. Countless large guilds wanted to partner with these major corporations. Unfortunately, none of these guilds had gained these corporations' interest. On the contrary, these major corporations had annexed quite a few large guilds in God's Domain, developing their own guilds rapidly. compared to Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, though Liang Jing, who stood behind Shifeng, was utterly baffled. She simply could not understand what was going on, even wondering if she were dreaming. Just this morning Shifeng had her accompany him on the earliest flight to Tianyuan City. Then she had met Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, surprised by their appearances. She had never actually expected Shifeng to know such stunning women. She had worked as the head secretary of Big Dipper's chairman Xiao for 3 years now, and she had seen many VIPs before. Based on Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's temperaments, she recognized that the women were far from ordinary. However, after arriving at the secret pavilion's branch headquarters, she was beyond astonished. Although she rarely paid attention to matters regarding the virtual gaming world, she knew a lot about the various major companies and corporations around the world. This was especially true for corporations. She had spotted the representatives of over a dozen major corporations since she had entered the building. Normally, these representatives were VIPs that not even Chairman Xiao qualified to meet, yet they had gathered in one location to attend an event that she too attended. The only explanation that she could think of for such a situation was that she must be dreaming. Although Shifeng was a martial arts master and someone that even Chairman Xiao had to treat with importance, he wasn't worth mentioning compared to these representatives. These people lived in entirely different worlds. Furthermore, the only thing Shifeng did, aside from his position as a martial arts instructor, was play God's Domain. While God's Domain was very popular, in Liang Jing's opinion, it was only a virtual reality game. Even if a virtual reality game were quite impressive, how could it possibly attract the attention of powerful international corporations? What Liang Jing did not know was that God's Domain was unlike any virtual reality game in the past. God's Domain was capable of extending its players' lifespans. If one took care of their body properly, it was possible to extend their lifespans by decades and centuries. Hence, God's Domain had attracted the attention of countless corporations to compete over the game and its limited resources. While Liang Jing reminded herself that she must be dreaming, a healthy middle-aged man wearing an elegant suit and tie approached Shifeng's group. Upon noticing this middle-aged man, many first-rate guilds and super first-rate guilds upper echelons turned to watch Shifeng's group. Damn it! Why did he choose Zero Wing? Nine Dragons Emperor gritted his teeth, nearly cracking them as he watched this elegant man stop before Shifeng. While Nine Dragons Emperor's eyes turned bloodshot, the middle-aged man introduced himself to Shifeng's group. Hello. You must be Zero Wing's representatives, right? Let me introduce myself. I am Lu Xinglua, the Starline Corporation's representative. May I know if we can find a quiet place for a proper chat? After the man introduced himself, some of the large guild's upper echelons, who hadn't recognized the representative, were dumbfounded. Even Liang Jing, who stood behind Shifeng, gaped when she learned the middle-aged man's identity. The Starline Corporation. That was one of the top 50 corporations in the entire world. Chapter 1784, Unyielding Soul. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. The Starline Corporation has its eye on Zero Wing. Had it not possible, right? Didn't Starline reject a partnership offer from a super first-rate guild before? Why would it suddenly set its sights on Zero Wing? If this is true, we'll have to be careful of Zero Wing in the future. The corporate representatives and the upper echelon of various guilds inside the hall discussed among themselves in hushed tones as they watched Lu Xinglua and Shifeng's group enter a private lounge. Meanwhile, Nine Dragons Emperor, who had quietly watched these proceedings from a corner of the room, frowned deeply. Previously, he had sought out the Starline Corporation for partnership but got rejected outright. He did not even manage to meet with a corporate representative like Lu Xinglua. The Starline Corporation was one of the major corporations that had invested in God's Domain early on, unlike those that joined the struggle after the game had garnered global fame. Hence, the Starline Corporation already had a solid foundation in God's Domain, so much so that even the various superpowers feared the corporation greatly. If Zero Wing really partnered with the Starline Corporation, then he would have a much harder time dealing with Zero Wing in the future. Uncle Yuan, what do you think this is all about? Is the Starline Corporation actually trying to partner with Zero Wing? Purple Jade, who was wearing a white dress, asked curiously as she watched Shifeng's group enter the private lounge. I'm not sure. From what I know, the Starline Corporation has never taken the initiative to seek a partnership with a guild before. Could Zero Wing still have some secrets that we are not aware of? Yuan Tiexin replied, shaking his head. He was also very confused by this situation. In fact, even the secret pavilion wanted to collaborate with the Starling Corporation, which held a large amount of energy resources, especially the extremely rare high-level energy. If the secret pavilion could get its hands on sufficient high-level energy, it would be able to nurture many more experts than before. This was also the reason why many super first-rate guilds and super guilds sought a partnership with the Starling Corporation. Inside the spacious private lounge, both sides were currently seated on leather sofas and observing each other. At this moment, Shifeng was honestly surprised that the famous Starling Corporation would approach Zero Wing. As for Liang Jing, she was already close to fainting. After the silence persisted for a while, Lu Xinglua shifted his gaze to Aqua Rose's cousin, revealing a playful smile as he said, "Miss Mu Lingsha, your unyielding soul really is tenacious. Do you think that, just because you managed to worm your way into the secret pavilion's internal auction this time, you'll be able to obtain that thing and avoid defeat?" Due to Lu Xinglua's words, the atmosphere inside the room suddenly became tense. Meanwhile, Shifeng and Gentle Snow automatically turned to look at Aqua Rose's cousin, who had remained silent all this time. "She's someone from Unyielding Soul?" Gentle Snow blinked repeatedly, her heart full of surprise as she looked at Mu Lingsha. Unyielding Soul was a veteran super first-rate guild. At its peak, it had been stronger than many super guilds. Although it had not made headlines during the past few years, it was still much stronger than the current Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. She found it very hard to imagine that such a super first-rate guild would need to rely on Zero Wing to get into the internal auction. What Gentle Snow did not know was that the secret pavilion had not sent an invitation to Unyielding Soul this time due to the Starling Corporation's meddling. Hence, Mu Lingsha had turned to Aqua Rose for help. The first reason for her decision was her family ties with Aqua Rose. The second reason was Aqua Rose's having been under Unyielding Soul and Mu Lingsha's care during her youth. Hence, the two of them could be considered best friends as well. As for getting Twilight Echo's help, that first-rate guild had refused to share any of its participation slots with Mu Lingsha when she asked. Just when Aqua Rose was feeling troubled by Mu Lingsha's request for help, Shifeng happened to reveal that he had received an invitation, a golden invitation card at that. Since there were additional slots, Aqua Rose ended up asking for one for her cousin. Meanwhile, despite having heard Lu Xinglua's question, Mu Lingsha remained silent for a long time. Just as she was about to say something, Lu Xinglua turned his gaze to Shifeng and Gentle Snow, who wore confused expressions on their faces. "It seems you don't know about this matter. Fine then. I'll treat this as Zero Wing being ignorant and overlook your transgressions. Afterward, just notify the secret pavilion's security and have them escort Miss Mu out of the building. In compensation for your wasting a participation slot, I'll send you 1 million credits later," Lu Xinglua said. He then sent one last glance at Mu Lingsha before standing up to leave. At Lu Xinglua's words, Mu Lingsha fell into despair. In the secret pavilion's internal auction, nobody had the authority to meddle with the people brought along by other invited persons. Only the invited persons themselves were allowed to send away their companions. The Starling Corporation possessed massive influence both in the game and in the real world, as proven by the fact that the secret pavilion had not sent an invitation to Unyielding Soul this time. If even an entity as powerful as the secret pavilion had shrunk back because of the Starling Corporation, there was no need to mention what kind of response a minor existence like Zero Wing would make. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose, who was sitting beside Shifeng, also turned pale at this turn of events. She had never thought that their actions would get discovered. Mu Lingsha was her best friend. However, Aqua Rose also owed Zero Wing a huge debt of gratitude. Caught in a dilemma, she was at a loss as to what to do. Just when Lu Xinglua's party made for the lounge's door, a voice suddenly rang out inside the room. 1 million credits? Chief Lu sure is generous. Unfortunately, Zero Wing can't accept this generosity. Since there aren't any other matters to discuss, we'll be taking our leave first. Although these words were spoken with a calm tone, they deeply ingrained themselves in the minds of everyone present. Aqua Rose, Mu Lingsha, and Liang Jing instinctively turned to Shifeng, the originator of these words. Meanwhile, Gentle Snow revealed a bitter smile as she helplessly shook her head, her expression conveying that she had expected this outcome. However, although Gentle Snow had a troubled look on her face, her eyes shone with joy and excitement. After all, it was because of this attitude of Shifeng's that she had chosen to join Zero Wing back then. Despite Zero Wing having grown considerably, Shifeng remained the same as before. He did not change his principles just because he now had more responsibilities on his plate. Although Shifeng's decision would bring no small amount of trouble to the guild, she still strongly supported this decision. Guild leader. Aqua Rose was greatly moved as she looked at Shifeng, who currently wore a calm and indifferent expression. Meanwhile, Liang Jing's mouth was hanging wide open. Although she did not understand what exactly was going on here, she knew very clearly just how frightening the Starling Corporation was. If Shifeng were to blatantly defy Lu Xinglua, Starling's representative, he would definitely incur a disaster. Moreover, it would be a disaster that could drive even Chairman Xiao to despair. Lu Xinglua, who had just arrived at the door, suddenly stopped. Thinking he had misheard, he turned around and looked at Shifeng, who had just gotten up from the sofa, and asked, "Does this mean you are rejecting my goodwill?" Although Lu Xinglua had spoken in a very bland and calm tone, the air inside the room seemed to have frozen when he was done speaking, the atmosphere becoming somewhat stifling. The pressure he exerted with his words even made Liang Jing shudder. Lu Xinglua was only an ordinary person. However, behind him was a monumental existence. If he wanted to, he could easily crush a company like the Big Dipper Group at any time. I have taken your kindness to heart, however. Zero Wing does not need an outsider to tell it what it should or should not do, Shifeng replied coldly. After he was done speaking, he led Aqua Rose and the others out of the private lounge. A short moment later, only Lu Xinglua and the tall man standing beside him remained inside the private lounge. Guild leader, do you need us to take action? The tall man asked quietly. No. This is the secret pavilion's territory. We naturally have to let the secret pavilion be the one to take action. Go and notify the secret pavilion's representative right now. Tell them that I do not wish to see Zero Wing in this auction. Lu Xinglua said, sneering as he watched the departing figures of Shifeng's group. Understood. After hearing Lu Xinglua's words, the tall man promptly left the lounge to notify the secret pavilion. Chapter 1785, Gold VIP. Hellscythe Underslucky Old Cat. Inside the top floor hall. When Shifeng's group exited the private lounge, it immediately attracted the attention of the various major powers present. Huh? They're out so soon? Could they be done negotiating already? Zero Wing's group had entered the private lounge less than 5 minutes ago. Everyone could not control their curiosity at this sudden development. However, just as everyone was wondering about the results of the talks between Zero Wing and the Starling Corporation, a tall man wearing a black suit walked out of the private lounge as well. When this tall man exited the lounge, he sent a sneer at Shifeng's group before heading for Yuan Tiexin, who was entertaining the representatives of the various major powers present. What's going on? Did the negotiations fail? Everyone in the room was familiar with this tall man. After all, he was Lu Xinglua's bodyguard, who also served as his aide. Meanwhile, the bodyguard's expression was not what one would make after a successful negotiation. No matter how they looked at it, rather, it seemed more like he was ridiculing Zero Wing's group. Walking beside Shifeng, Aqua Rose noticed Lu Xinglua's bodyguard's direction, and her complexion darkened. Are they planning on using the secret pavilion to deal with us? Aqua Rose could not help frowning in worry as she watched the bodyguard getting increasingly closer to Yuan Tiexin. The Starling Corporation had already relied on its influence to stop the secret pavilion from sending an invitation to Unyielding Soul, a super first-rate guild. Getting the secret pavilion to remove Zero Wing from the auction would be even easier. If Zero Wing were to miss out on this internal auction, it would suffer a massive loss. No need to panic. Let's see how things develop first, Shifeng said calmly as he looked at Lu Xinglua's bodyguard. If it really isn't possible, then we'll just leave. While it was indeed true that the items auctioned by the secret pavilion were extraordinary, Zero Wing was not so desperate that it would collapse just because it couldn't get them. At this time, Mu Lingsha walked up to Shifeng. Thank you. Because of my problem, I have caused Zero Wing to provoke the Starling Corporation. I'd like to use a plot of land in Dark Knight City as compensation. The land is under my name and is located near the city's central district. Mu Lingsha thanked Shifeng sincerely. When faced with the threats and pressure of the Starling Corporation, few would be willing to help Unyielding Soul. After all, even Twilight Echo, a veteran first-rate guild that had close ties with Unyielding Soul, had yielded to Starling's tyranny. Nonetheless, Zero Wing, a guild that had practically no relations with Unyielding Soul, had actually stood up to Starling for Unyielding Soul. Upon hearing Mu Lingsha's words, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow turned involuntarily to look at her in surprise. They had never thought that Mu Lingsha would use a valuable plot of land located within the Dark Knight Empire's imperial capital as a token of gratitude. Nowadays, major corporations and companies around the world were investing in God's domain, boosting the prices of lands in major NPC cities as a result, especially in kingdom capitals and imperial capitals. A plot of land without high potential would still sell for a fortune. As for those with high potential, even if one offered tens of thousands of gold to purchase such a land, nobody would be willing to sell. Shi Feng found it difficult to refuse such compensation. The Dark Knight Empire's imperial capital had a player population of over 10 million. If he could set up the candlelight trading firm on this plot of land, the trading firm would gain access to all these players. At that time, Candlelight's income would definitely increase by a significant margin. Hence, Shi Feng ended up accepting Mu Lingsha's offer. Meanwhile, over at Yuan Tiexin's location, Lu Xingluo's bodyguard had arrived before Yuan Tiexin and relayed his employer's words to him. Upon receiving this unreasonable demand, Yuan Tiexin fell silent. He simply could not figure out just what Zero Wing had done to anger Lu Xingluo this much. I hope that the secret pavilion can make a decision soon. The Starline Corporation dislikes having to wait, Lu Xingluo's bodyguard said in an indifferent tone. In his opinion, there was no need to consider this decision at all. The Starline Corporation was entirely out of Zero Wing's league. It would be in the secret pavilion's best interests to go along with the Starline Corporation's demands and remove Zero Wing from the auction. The nearby people who overheard the bodyguard's words were momentarily dumbfounded. They had never thought that Zero Wing would be so bold as to actually provoke the Starline Corporation. Zero Wing really is overestimating itself to go against the Starline Corporation. When Nine Dragons Emperor received this piece of news, he could not help but laugh. Previously, he thought that Zero Wing would obtain the Starline Corporation's support. If that had happened, he would most likely be doomed. After all, Phoenix Rain would have indirectly gained a powerful helper in the fight to become the Great Pavilion Master. However, now that Zero Wing had provoked the Starline Corporation, not only did this outcome not provide Phoenix Rain with the slightest bit of help, but it would also become a huge hindrance to her becoming the Great Pavilion Master. After all, the Guild Elders would have to take the Starline Corporation into account when considering Phoenix Rain for the position. Meanwhile, when the various major powers attending the auction received news about this matter, they were similarly shocked. Zero Wing's foolishness had thoroughly exceeded their imagination. The Guild had actually provoked the Starline Corporation for some unknown outsider. The Starline Corporation was in possession of plenty of high-level energy, which many superpowers had tried to purchase to no avail. Now that Zero Wing had become a thorn in the corporation's side, many superpowers would probably gun for Zero Wing to curry favor with Starline. At that time, even if they failed to establish a partnership with the corporation, they should still be able to purchase some high-level energy to strengthen their own guilds. Damn it. The secret pavilion will most likely earn the Starline Corporation's favor. Zero Wing sure is pitiful. Despite this being the guild's first time at one of the secret pavilion's internal auctions, it is already going to get chased off before it can even take part in the actual auction. The representatives of the various superpowers looked at Shi Feng's group with pity in their eyes. Uncle Yuan? Purple Jade was dying of curiosity as she looked at Yuan Tiexin, who had remained silent all this time. Yuan Tiexin was the host for this auction. All matters relating to this secret pavilion branch were currently under his management. In normal times, the secret pavilion would definitely remove Zero Wing from the premises without hesitation, to curry favor with the Starline Corporation. After all, there was simply no comparison between the two. What is it? I'm just asking to have Zero Wing's people removed from the auction venue. Is this a difficult matter for you to accomplish? Lu Xingluo's bodyguard demanded in irritation as he looked at the unresponsive Yuan Tiexin. It is indeed very difficult as I do not have this authority. Although I am the host for the auction this time, Zero Wing is just like the Starline Corporation and is a VIP invited with a gold card, Yuan Tiexin explained after taking a deep breath. Chapter 1786, Book of Undying. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. Zero Wing received a gold card. Zero Wing's group does include 5 people. It's actually true. The various major powers who perked up to listen in on the conversation between Yuan Xiexin and Lu Xinglua's bodyguard couldn't help their surprise upon hearing this revelation. When the secret pavilion hosted an internal auction, it would only send 50 golden invitation cards. These gold cards would only be given to powers the secret pavilion acknowledged. The various representatives hadn't paid much attention to the number of people in Zero Wing's group. It was rare to see the powers with a gold card use all 5 of their slots. They generally only brought 2 or 3 people. Hence, the major powers that attended the secret pavilion's internal auction had stopped paying attention to how many attendees a particular power had with it. They were all quite familiar with the powers that qualified for a gold card, and even if some people arrived as a group of 5, it was likely that 2 friendly powers had decided to attend together. However, most of the eavesdropping powers were more surprised to learn that the Starline Corporation wanted Zero Wing removed than they were to learn that the secret pavilion had invited the guild as a gold VIP. So what if Zero Wing received a gold invitation? Lu Xinglua's bodyguard asked nonchalantly. Although he was Lu Xinglua's bodyguard, he was also an expert in God's domain. He knew a significant amount about the game. Had the Starline Corporation not dissuaded the secret pavilion from sending an invitation to Unyielding Soul, the guild would have received a gold card, treated like a gold VIP, yet due to the corporation's interference, hadn't the secret pavilion failed to send the super first-rate guild an invitation. Is that so? Yuan Xiexin responded with a tinge of anger in his voice. The secret pavilion will not rescind an invitation from any of its guests, regardless of if they are bronze or silver VIPs, unless they have made a mistake. If you have nothing else, please wait in the banquet hall quietly. The auction will begin soon. Not inviting someone to the auction and removing an invited person from the auction were 2 entirely different things. If word got out that the secret pavilion had removed Zero Wing from the auction at the Starline Corporation's request, who would dare do business with the secret pavilion in the future? Although the high-level energy in the Starline Corporation's possession was indeed tempting, the secret pavilion did not necessarily need the Starline Corporation to acquire high-level energy. There were still plenty of major corporations that had the resource. Lu Xinglua's bodyguard was furious. He had never expected the secret pavilion to show the Starline Corporation so little respect. As he thought about correcting this insult, he locked eyes with Yuan Xiexin's 2 bodyguards, whose auras were no weaker than his. Clenching his teeth, he turned and left. The spectating powers were dumbfounded. None of them had dreamed that the secret pavilion would disrespect the Starline Corporation. However, the representatives from the various super first-rate guilds and super guilds weren't overly surprised about the outcome. Although the Starline Corporation wielded considerable influence, the several corporations backing the secret pavilion were no weaker than Starline. The Starline Corporation was somewhat unique in how much high-level energy it possessed, and that was the only reason the various superpowers showed it some respect. After all, in the current era, many aspects required high-level energy. It was also because of this reason that the Starline Corporation had always done things in a tyrannical way. This was also something superpowers like themselves had long since gotten used to. However, while they would concede to the Starline Corporation in small matters, no superpower would bow to the corporation in crucial matters, much less a transcendental power like the secret pavilion. Uncle Yuan, you were so amazing. When we return, the guild leader will likely request a meeting, Purple Jade said, giggling. You little girl? Yuan Xiexin rolled his eyes at Purple Jade. He then shifted his gaze towards Shifeng's group. However, Zero Wing really knows how to cause trouble wherever it goes. It even dares to meddle in matters between the Starline Corporation and Unyielding Soul. The Starline Corporation and Unyielding Soul were going at each other's throats in the Dark Knight Empire in a struggle that would only end once one of them had been utterly defeated. Meanwhile, the chances that Unyielding Soul would lose were very high. It would not even be surprising if Unyielding Soul fell from its position as a super first-rate guild. Unyielding Soul's main headquarters was in the Dark Knight Empire, and the guild had focused a lot of its efforts on developing in the empire. If it lost the Dark Knight Empire, its strength would diminish tremendously. Meanwhile, in the private lounge Lu Xinglua occupied, Lu Xinglua's bodyguard quickly relayed Yuan Xiexin's response. Guild leader, the secret pavilion is refusing to show us the respect we deserve. Should we put some pressure on the pavilion? The tall bodyguard asked. No. There's no need to sour our relationship with the secret pavilion over this small matter. So what if Unyielding Soul gets to attend this auction? With the guild's foundations, competing with us here will be futile, Lu Xinglua said, shaking his head. He was not his bodyguard. He knew just how powerful the secret pavilion was. If the Starling Corporation truly angered the secret pavilion, the corporation would get the short end of the stick, not the pavilion. The secret pavilion simply had too much influence in God's domain, and it had even more resources. Very few superpowers in God's domain could compete with the pavilion. What about Zero Wing? The bodyguard asked again. A worm. Once we return, notify the players from Dark Soul and have them take care of it, Lu Xinglua said, snorting. Even a super first-rate guild like Unyielding Soul amounted to nothing in his eyes, much less an up-and-coming guild like Zero Wing. Of course, although he did not regard Zero Wing with any importance, since a worm had dared to insult him, he would stomp it to death. Understood, the bodyguard sneered. Had Zero Wing obediently accepted their goodwill, it would have received at least 1 million credits. But now that Lu Xinglua wanted to mobilize Dark Soul, it wouldn't be long until the guild was obliterated from God's domain. Meanwhile, in the banquet hall, the previously dull atmosphere had livened considerably after the drama between the Starling Corporation and Zero Wing. After everyone chatted for a while longer, some staff members came and notified the guests about the start of the auction. The representatives then made their way towards the venue the secret pavilion had prepared. Compared to the auction venues in God's domain, the secret pavilion's venue wasn't worth mentioning. The venue could at most house around 3,000 people. That was a fraction of the auction venues in God's domain, which could easily house tens of thousands of people. However, nobody looked down on the small venue. The most insignificant of the guests were representatives from first-rate guilds. Second- and third-rate guilds could never qualify for an invitation. Moreover, the secret pavilion had prepared plenty of items for this auction. As the first internal auction since God's domain had launched, the secret pavilion had over 2,000 items for sale, and none of these items could be purchased in the game. Among these items, over 150 had been set aside for the finale. Needless to say, these finale items were extraordinarily valuable. The cheapest among these items had a minimum bid of 2,000 gold. Once the bidding began, even first-rate guilds would despair. However, every one of these finale items was definitely worth its weight in gold. Otherwise, the secret pavilion wouldn't have bothered with them. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the secret pavilion's internal auction. As always, items will go to the highest bidder. This time, though, we will give priority to bids involving God's domain's magic crystals and coins, Yuan Chexin explained after stepping onto the main stage. Without further ado, let us begin the auction and welcome our first item for the day. When Yuan Chexin finished speaking, the image of a thick tome appeared on the virtual display above him. Several words graced the tome's cover in large text, and based on the footage, it was clear that the tome passively gathered mana around it. The tome certainly wasn't an ordinary item. The item instantly grasped the crowd's attention. The Book of Undying? Shifeng could not help his shock when he saw the image. Why is this thing here? Chapter 1787. Tome of Astronomical Value. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. Inside the luxurious auction hall. Upon seeing the Book of Undying, every representative's eyes shone with greed. Although they couldn't read the tome's statistics like they could in God's domain, all of these people were representatives from major powers. They all possessed great insight. As expected of the secret pavilion, the first time is already so frightening. The various major powers present could not help but discuss the Book of Undying. When Yuan Chexin saw the crowd before him stir, he was immensely satisfied. This had been the reaction he had aimed for when he chose the Book of Undying as the first item. I believe that you all recognize the rarity of this Book of Undying. For the buyer's benefit, I won't share the specifics of this tome's attributes. I will only give a general summary. This tome is a dark gold ranked item. Even so, it is a super rare item that can resurrect the dead. This item will halve the death penalty for players it resurrects. It can also be used on NPCs. I believe you can recognize its value, Yuan Chexin explained. After hearing the item's introduction, everyone in the venue became even more passionate to acquire the Book of Undying. The various superpowers representatives in particular felt their blood pressure rise considerably. The Book of Undying's ability to resurrect players was subpar at best. After all, there were plenty of tools and skills in God's domain that had the ability to alleviate the death penalty players suffered. However, it was an entirely different story if the Book of Undying could resurrect NPCs. The Book of Undying was especially valuable to superpowers that possessed powerful personal guards. Although there were other means to resurrect a personal guard, these means were not easy to accomplish. Moreover, the price one had to pay to use these means was astronomical. Hence, superpowers generally avoided risking their personal guards. However, as the Book of Undying was a dark gold item, not a one-time use item, it could be used indefinitely. In other words, with this item, one could freely resurrect their personal guards. They would not have to worry about their personal guards dying by accident. The Book of Undying was far more valuable than some ordinary epic item. I won't waste your time. The starting price is 1,000 gold, with each increment being no less than 50 gold. In addition, credit bids will not be accepted. Yuan Tiexin shouted. 1,500 gold. 2,000 gold. 2,500 gold. The price quickly soared to 5,000 gold, and the various major powers were surprised by how fast the price had risen. The bidding even troubled first-rate guilds. Although their guilds earned quite a bit of wealth every day, their daily operations required a lot of coins and resources. In preparation for the auction today, the various major powers had raised a significant amount of funding, but even so, these first-rate guilds had only prepared around 30 to 40,000 gold. They couldn't possibly throw all their money at a single item. Moreover, all of the attending powers had specific targets in mind. They all wanted to win the items that their guilds needed most. 8,000 gold. 9 Dragons Emperor, who sat in one of the second-floor rooms, increased the price by 3,000 gold, immediately silencing the various major powers in the first-floor hall. While the various powers could afford to raise the bid further, on the off chance that they won the tome, they'd have trouble winning the items they truly wanted. 10,000 gold. However, a few seconds after the 8,000 gold bid went up, Shifeng, who occupied room number 8, raised it. Who placed that bid? You can buy epic equipment with that kind of money. It seems Zero Wing is the bidder. This is insane. This is only the first auction item. The major powers in the first-floor hall could not help but turn to look at Shifeng's room, astonished by the man's generosity. What they didn't know, however, was that Shifeng understood more about the Book of Undying than its current owner. He knew exactly how valuable the item was. On its own, the Book of Undying was only worth around 10,000 gold, roughly as much as an epic weapon. While the Book of Undying was capable of resurrecting NPCs, it wasn't capable of resurrecting all NPCs. The secret pavilion had failed to mention this bit of crucial information. At the end of the day, the Book of Undying for auction was only a dark gold item. Although the skill it possessed was heaven-defying, there was a limit to the skill's effects. At dark gold rank, the Book of Undying could only resurrect Tier 2 NPCs and players. It wouldn't be effective on Tier 3 and above existences. Otherwise, it wouldn't just be a dark gold item. This had been why the secret pavilion had been willing to part with the tome, putting it up for auction. The various major powers had likely guessed the tome's limitations as well, which explained why they weren't enthusiastic to purchase the item. If the Book of Undying were an epic item, the various superpowers would likely bid like madmen. No one would have been surprised to see the tome's price climb to 5 times more than its current bid. However, even though the Book of Undying was only dark gold rank, the fact that it was available was a pleasant surprise for Shifeng. Although the tome wouldn't help him resurrect Tier 3 NPCs and above, it was enough for Shifeng's uses right now. At the very least, he could involve Anna and Kite in combat without worrying about them dying. After Shifeng had raised the bid for the Book of Undying to 10,000 gold, 9 Dragons Emperor gave up on the item. For him, the Book of Undying was a collector's item of sorts. Paying more for it wouldn't be worthwhile. 10,000 gold going once. 10,000 gold going twice. However, just when Yuan Tiexin was about to finalize the sale, a new bid appeared. 12,000 gold. Many people turned to the bidder in astonishment. Meanwhile, the person who had placed this new bid was none other than the Starline Corporation's Lu Xinglua. 13,000 gold. Shifeng raised the bid once more. This surprised everyone further. They never thought that Shifeng would be so desperate for the Book of Undying. That was 13,000 gold they were talking about. With that kind of money, he could purchase a valuable plot of land in any capital. 13,500 gold. 14,000 gold. 14,500 gold. Whenever Shifeng placed a new bid, Lu Xinglua quickly added another 500 gold. When the price rose to 20,000 gold, the various major powers were utterly dumbfounded. Paying 20,000 gold for a dark gold item was ridiculous. It'd be far more beneficial to build a town with this money. 24,000 gold. Not wanting to waste time, Shifeng raised the price by another 4,000 gold. As the price rose, Yuan Tiexin's breathing became a little heavier. The bid was already more than double what he had expected. "Forget it, I don't want this item anymore," Lu Xinglua said, chuckling as he relented. Once Lu Xinglua dropped out of the bidding, Shifeng eventually won the Book of Undying, surprising many of the representatives with Zero Wing's financial strength. They also inwardly ridiculed Zero Wing for spending 24,000 gold on a dark gold item. Even Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose felt that it was excessive to purchase the Book of Undying for such a high price. However, after Shifeng paid the 24,000 gold by connecting to God's domain's main god system via his quantum watch and received the Book of Undying from the secret pavilion, his smile was bright. The Book of Undying was a dark gold item, but he knew something the secret pavilion had failed to discover. There wasn't just one Book of Undying in God's domain, but 13. Every one of these tomes was a dark gold item, which Undying Dionysius had penned personally. Even Tier 6 gods had failed to kill Dionysius, hence his title of Undying. In the end, an ancient god had sealed Dionysius away. Meanwhile, the 13 books of Undying contained all of Dionysius's power, and there were rumors stating that Undying Dionysius had recorded a method of self-resurrection in his books. How could these tomes, written by such a powerful existence, be just ordinary dark gold items? The books of Undying were powerful in the fact that they could be merged. When one combined 2 copies of the Book of Undying, its ability would improve. Only after merging all 13 books of Undying could one display the tome's true power. As for the complete book's rank, no one had known even 10 years after God's domain's launch. However, most people guessed that it would be a legendary item. This was because only 10 copies had ever been found, and the strongest Book of Undying had only absorbed 2 other copies, reaching epic rank. As an epic item, the Book of Undying could resurrect Tier 3 NPCs. Now that a Book of Undying had appeared before him, it wouldn't do him any harm to start collecting the tomes now. On the off chance that he found 3 copies one day, he could upgrade the tome to epic rank and it would be of great help to him. Once the Book of Undying's auction had concluded, Yuan Tiexin proceeded to introduce other auction items. However, none of the following items were nearly as valuable as that first tome. Moreover, representatives could pay for the following items with credits. Shifeng had to admit that the secret pavilion offered a large variety of items, including 20+ pieces of level 50 fine gold equipment and 50+ level 50 secret silver equipment pieces that increased fire resistance. In the end, Shifeng had spent over 7,3 gold to acquire all of them. If not for Lu Xinglua's interference, raising the price from time to time, he could have easily purchased this equipment for only 4,000 gold. By the time the ordinary items had sold, more than a day had passed. The secret pavilion then hosted a friendly competition to determine how many finale items each of the various powers could purchase. This friendly competition also gave everyone a glimpse of the various superpowers' up-and-coming experts. Finally, we'll start the bidding for our first finale item of the day, Yuan Tiexin announced, chuckling as he glanced at the second-floor rooms. I believe that many of you are familiar with this next item. On cue, several images appeared on the display above the stage. When these images had appeared, a commotion tore through the attentive crowd. Even the representatives in the second-floor rooms stared with bloodshot eyes. When Mu Lingsha, who sat beside Aqua Rose, saw these images, her fists balled as excitement lit up her face. She simply couldn't keep her calm. Chapter 1788, Grade 1. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. When the images appeared above the main stage, the representatives of super first-rate guilds and super guilds in the second-floor rooms became restless. They promptly relayed what they were seeing back to their respective guild leaders. Guild leader, those rumors were true. The secret pavilion really has that thing. The secret pavilion sure knows how to keep a secret. Are you absolutely sure about this? Based on the images, there's no mistaking it. However, there are simply too many major powers and corporations present. I'm afraid acquiring it will be difficult with the money we brought. Good. I'll have someone mail you all the funds we have available. Due to the several images, the various superpowers in attendance all started secretly raising funds. This situation enveloped the entire auction venue in tension. The major powers in the first floor hall sensed an imminent storm. The secret pavilion really is a sly old fox. Is it trying to have us superpowers and corporations tear at each other's throats? Nine Dragons Emperor tightly balled his fists, his eyes gleaming with indescribable excitement. He turned to Martial Dragon, who sat beside him, and said, "Quick! Have Blood Dragon sell all our available resources in the Black Dragon Empire. Mortgage some of the unused golden lands in Black Dragon City as well. In any case, collect as many coins and magic crystals as we can." "Pavilion Master, isn't that a little too much?" Martial Dragon was stunned by Nine Dragons Emperor's decision. The golden lands of Black Dragon City were worth a fortune, with countless buyers waiting in the wings. If the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion were to mortgage these lands and fail to buy them back in time, it might lose these lands to other powers. "It's fine. As long as we can get that thing, this small price is inconsequential," Nine Dragons Emperor said as he shook his head. His eyes were filled with madness and ambition as he looked at the images displayed above the stage. "Understood." Martial Dragon immediately contacted Blood Dragon. Meanwhile, in another room, the elegant and scholarly Lu Xinglua stood up involuntarily and stared at the pictures the secret pavilion had revealed. "Good. Wonderful. As long as we obtain this, the entire Dark Knight Empire will be mine for the taking. Nobody will be able to oppose me anymore." Lu Xinglua laughed. "Congratulations, guild leader. At that time, both Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul will meet their end." Zhong Langqing, Lu Xinglua's bodyguard, exclaimed in excitement. "How is the fundraising I tasked you with coming along?" Lu Xinglua asked, turning around. "Guild leader, rest assured. Our funds are all here now," Zhong Langqing replied, smiling. Meanwhile, in the room occupied by Zero Wing, the sight of the first finale item, the secret pavilion, was auctioning set Shifeng's heart racing. "The secret pavilion actually dares auction something like this?" he exclaimed in astonishment. At this moment, he understood why the Starline Corporation had done its best to prevent Unyielding Soul from taking part in this auction. If it were him, he would have done the same. He also understood why Mu Lingsha was willing to part with a plot of high-potential land in the Dark Knight Empire's imperial capital just so that she could participate in this internal auction. The reason for this was the thing the secret pavilion was trying to sell. It was simply too frightening. The first finale item was neither a weapon nor a piece of equipment. It also wasn't a tool. Instead, it was the management rights to an vein. If it were any ordinary vein, most likely even the first-rate guilds present wouldn't bother bidding for it. If it were a manatite vein that could produce small amounts of magic crystals, then it would tempt even superpowers to go all out. Meanwhile, above a manatite vein would be an energy vein that produced energy Oregon. The discovery of an energy vein would definitely trigger a war among super guilds. However, manatite veins and energy veins, or veins capable of tempting even superpowers to take action, were considered only grade 2 veins in God's domain. The vein the secret pavilion had just revealed was a grade 1 vein, a magic crystal vein. Based on the pictures shown, although the magic crystal vein the secret pavilion discovered was not a rich one, its value was still beyond that of a rich manatite vein or a rich energy vein. This magic crystal vein would supply enough magic crystals to sustain the daily operations of 2 super guilds and still have excess to spare. The surplus was because magic crystals were just the main product of a magic crystal vein. The byproducts of a magic crystal vein were also worth a fortune. One such example was magic silver, one of the top-ranking ores in God's domain in terms of hardness. It was considered a super rare material. When used in forging weapons and equipment, the final product would be unbreakable. This special property meant that even if the durability of the item with magic silver reached 0, the weapon or equipment would not become useless. Although its attributes would decrease by a significant margin, it could still be used. Due to this special property, an ingot of magic silver could sell for roughly 20 gold on the market. Any that appeared at such a price would be purchased almost instantly. While the occupants of the second-floor rooms were going crazy over the revealed images, Yuan Tiexing swept a glance at the various private rooms. Smiling, he said, "Everyone has now seen the item in question. If you are not familiar with it, you may find the relevant information in the libraries of kingdoms or empires. However, I believe that everyone present knows its value. The auction for this first finale item will be very simple. Same as always, it will go to the highest bidder. However, the secret pavilion will not be accepting credits for this sale. The winner of this auction will receive a 40% share in this magic crystal vein. In other words, the winner will receive 40% of this vein's harvest. Everyone might not know what 40% of the harvest entails. I won't go into the specifics, but suffice to say 40% of this vein's harvest is definitely more than what you can get from an entire energy vein. Moreover, the byproducts of this magic crystal vein are all highly sought-after materials that can help elevate a guild's lifestyle players to a whole new level. However, before we start this auction, the secret pavilion also has to state one thing clearly. The winner of this auction will have to station a large number of experts and elites at the vein for the long run, and the number cannot be fewer than 100,000. If you are incapable of fulfilling this condition, winning the auction would be pointless. If nobody has any problems, then let us begin the auction for today's first finale item. The minimum bid will be 100,000 gold, and each increment must not be lower than 1,000 gold or 2,000 magic crystals. Upon hearing Yuan Tiexing's words, the lively auction venue suddenly fell deathly silent. The upper echelon of the various first-rate guilds seated in the first-floor hall could not help but gape. Any thoughts in the first-floor hall of competing for the mana crystal vein immediately vanished. The long-term requirement of having a 100,000-man army guarding the vein aside, just the starting price was already enough to make every first-rate guild in attendance give up. 100,000 gold. Although these first-rate guilds understood that this was a very normal price, actually hearing it coming out of Yuan Tiexing's mouth still shocked them. In preparation for this auction, these guilds had gone through plenty of trouble just to collect around 30,000 gold. Yet now it was revealed that they were far from qualified to bid on this magic crystal vein. The powers that could rival first-rate guilds were also silent. They finally understood just how wide a gap there was between themselves and the various superpowers, who lived in an entirely different world. They weren't even eligible to take part in this auction. All they could do was play the role of a spectator. Chapter 1789, Crazy Struggle. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. 100,000 gold? Shi Feng smiled bitterly as he shook his head. In reality he too was very tempted by the magic crystal vein. However, despite all his efforts, he had managed to raise only a little over 124,000 gold. After deducting the amount he spent on the Book of Undying, fire resistance equipment and rare materials, he had just a bit more than 90,000 gold left. He didn't have the slightest chance of winning the upcoming auction. As the various major powers in the first-floor hall were marveling over the magic crystal vein's high price, the occupants of the second-floor room started calling out bids, one after another. 100,000 gold. 110,000 gold. 120,000 gold. After the first bid appeared, the price of the magic crystal vein increased rapidly, the scene stupefying the various first-rate guilds present. Despite the minimum increment being set at 1,000 gold, the various superpowers and major corporations were raising the price in 10,000 gold increments as if 10,000 gold were no different from 10,000 copper. In less than a minute, the price had already reached a staggering 200,000 gold. Only after the price reached 270,000 gold did the price increases decline to 2,000 or 3,000 gold increments. Even so, this was still plenty frightening to the various first-rate guilds present. Damn it! Why are there so many people competing for the vein? Nine Dragons Emperor frowned as he watched the price ramp up. Turning to Martial Dragon, he asked, "How are things coming along on Blood's side?" He had prepared only 210,000 gold for this auction. Including the magic crystals he had on hand, his funds came to roughly 250,000 gold. Just now he had mortgaged several golden lands in Black Dragon City, netting an additional 140,000 gold and putting his total at 390,000 gold. This was already 10 times the amount a first-rate guild could produce in short notice. However, the various superpowers and major corporations were like bottomless pits as they continuously hiked up their bids. Now the price was already close to 300,000. Moreover, he knew full well that the various superpowers were still only probing each other's depths. They had yet to truly make a move. Despite the restraint of the various superpowers and major corporations, the price of the magic crystal vein was already approaching the limit of his budget. Pavilion Master, Blood Dragon has already asked the guild elders for a loan. The elders feel that this is a good purchase and are willing to lend us 60,000 gold. If we succeed in the purchase, they want 10% of the vein's shares as interest. If we fail, they want 30% interest, Martial Dragon said helplessly. Although they all belonged to the same guild, the guild elders each operated their own faction. Although their factions were not strong individually, when they banded together, they were a frightening force to behold. Meanwhile, this combined power was under the great Pavilion Master's control. Hence, Pavilion Masters like Nine Dragons Emperor and Phoenix Rain could not command these elders. They could only try to rope in these elders to their side. Those old bastards actually have the gall to ask for 10% of the shares? Nine Dragons Emperor turned ashen upon hearing the loan conditions. The guild elders had outright asked for a quarter of the shares he would be getting. Fine. I agree to their conditions. However, tell them that 60,000 gold is too little. I will also need all of their magic crystals. Otherwise, I'll just give up on the auction. Although 60,000 gold was a significant sum, it was still insufficient for him to compete against the various superpowers. Only after he and the elders pooled everything they had would they stand a chance in the auction. While Nine Dragons Emperor was raising funds, the price of the magic crystal vein had already increased to 352,000 gold. At the same time, the various superpowers and major corporations were also doing their best to gather more funds. However, this price had already rendered the crowd in the first floor hall utterly speechless. It seems some guilds and corporations are already approaching their limit. Lu Xinglua smiled when he noticed the rate of bidding slowing down. Turning to his bodyguard, he said, "Let's begin then." Understood. Zhong Langqing immediately keyed in a series of zeros on the bidding interface. 500,000 gold. The moment this price appeared, the entire auction venue went into an uproar. Even Shifeng's mouth twitched involuntarily when he saw this bid. With that kind of money he could already build 2 cities in Starmoon Kingdom. Seeing this price also allowed him to understand just how frightening the various superpowers were. The difference between himself and them was not something that he could easily bridge just by having more information on God's domain. Why does the Starling Corporation have so much money? Nine Dragons Emperor felt like puking up blood when he saw this amount. Although the Starling Corporation was strong and had annexed quite a few first-rate guilds, it had also spent a lot of money to develop its guild, far more than what super first-rate guilds had spent. Logically, the corporation shouldn't have that many coins to spare. At this moment, let alone Nine Dragons Emperor, even the representatives of the Sacred Temple, Battle Wolves, Pantheon, Nine Heavens Pavilion, and other super guilds were taken aback by the Starling Corporation's bid. Although they too possessed that much money, spending it would no doubt cause their guild a cash flow shortage in the near term. The Starling Corporation's guild would definitely suffer an even greater setback. Shortly after Lu Xinglua placed the bid of 500,000 gold, Mu Lingsha also clenched her teeth and topped it. 510,000 gold. This price likewise stunned the various superpowers present. Although Unyielding Soul was a super first-rate guild, as its development in the Dark Knight Empire had not gone smoothly, the guild should not have that much money to spare. However, what the various superpowers did not know was that, in order to contest for the management rights of the magic crystal vein, Unyielding Soul had long since mortgaged many of its properties and was prepared to duke it out with the Starling Corporation. After all, if the Starling Corporation acquired the magic crystal vein, Unyielding Soul's development in the Dark Knight Empire would be doomed. Hence, Unyielding Soul had accumulated a total of 625,000 gold's worth of coins and magic crystals to compete with the Starling Corporation. Ah, you want to compete against the Starling Corporation in terms of financial strength? Lu Xinglua sneered at Mu Lingsha's new bid. A pity? Truly a pity. The Starling Corporation might not have as powerful a background as a super first-rate guild like Unyielding Soul, but we do have high-level energy. In order to acquire the magic crystal vein, the Starling Corporation had traded 400,000 gold's worth of high-level energy with the secret pavilion. Of course, it had stipulated that Unyielding Soul would not be invited to the internal auction. Including the 300,000 gold the corporation raised, Starling had a total of 700,000 gold prepared to purchase the vein. At this stage of the game, even the various super guilds were incapable of taking out 700,000 gold, which was why he was confident of acquiring the magic crystal vein. After some back and forth, the price eventually reached 630,000 gold, the bid being placed by Lu Xinglua. This figure caused many of the superpowers present to give up on the auction. They also could not help but marvel at the Starling Corporation's financial strength. Aqua, I wish to borrow money from Zero Wing. I am willing to use a few plots of golden land in the Dark Knight Empire as collateral. These lands are worth around 70,000 gold in total. I wish to borrow 60,000 gold. I will pay you back in 5 days with 30% interest. If I fail to repay the loan, these golden lands will be 0 wings, Mu Lingsha said after making some calculations. At this point she could tell that the price of the magic crystal vein was already close to Lu Xinglua's limit. After all, the man was no longer as decisive when placing his bids. Meanwhile, through Aqua Rose she had learned much about Zero Wing. Hence, she knew that Zero Wing had prepared quite a lot of funds for the auction this time, several times more than the average first-rate guild in fact. Hence, it should be possible for Zero Wing to lend her 60,000 gold. If she had these 60,000 gold coins, she would have a greater chance of winning against Lu Xinglua. Aqua Rose was slightly troubled as she turned to look at Shi Feng, unsure whether she should agree to this request or not. Miss Mu, how about this? I can lend you 100,000 gold's worth of funds. However, Zero Wing does not need any collateral or the 30% interest. We only want to borrow some manpower from Unyielding Soul. What do you think of this proposal? Shi Feng suggested. Although he had thought of using this opportunity to acquire some of the magic crystal vein shares, the percentage of shares he could obtain in the end would most likely not amount to much. In that case, the number of magic crystals Zero Wing could get from the vein would be a drop in the bucket, given Zero Wing's current magic crystal shortage. Meanwhile, earning an additional 18,000 gold from the 30% interest would not help Zero Wing by much either. Rather than these negligible benefits, it would be far more meaningful to borrow Unyielding Soul strength instead. After all, it was normally impossible to borrow the strength of a superpower without paying an exorbitant price. You don't need any collateral or interest. You're willing to lend us 100,000 gold in exchange for only manpower? Mu Lingsha's eyes widened in shock as she stared at Shi Feng, her mind finding both Zero Wing's financial strength and Shi Feng's proposed conditions inconceivable. Chapter 1790, or Vein of Astronomical Value. Hellscythe Underlucky Old Cat. Upon hearing Shi Feng's proposal, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow could not help but stare at him in disbelief. They could not understand why he would actually abandon such a good opportunity to make money and instead settle for just borrowing manpower from Unyielding Soul. Meanwhile, during the time Shi Feng and Mu Lingsha were discussing this point, Yuan Tiexin had slammed his gavel for the second time. 630,000, going twice. Is there nobody present willing to offer a higher price? Yuan Tiexin asked as he glanced at the audience before him. Although 630,000 gold already exceeded the secret pavilion's original estimates, earning a few more coins would not do the pavilion any harm. Greedy bastard. Lu Xinglua frowned at Yuan Tiexin's deliberate prolongation of the auction. 630,000 gold was already far outside of his expectations. He had never thought that Unyielding Soul would be capable of taking out so much money. With such an expenditure, even if he could eventually recover the cost from the profits generated by the magic crystal vein, it would take a very long time before he could recoup his entire investment. Not to mention he would also have to station an army of 100,000 players at the vein over the long run, which would further increase the time needed to recover his cost. The only fortunate matter was that the magic crystal vein produced magic crystals and rare ores that were very difficult to acquire on the market. For the foreseeable future, the Starline Corporation would no longer have to worry about its guild's daily magic crystal expenditure. Meanwhile, inside Shi Feng's room. Alright, I agree with your conditions. Mu Lingsha nodded to Shi Feng. Although she was neither Unyielding Soul's guild leader nor vice guild leader, she was the heiress of Unyielding Soul's biggest shareholder. Moreover, Unyielding Soul had already granted her full authority over the auction this time. If it was only getting some of Unyielding Soul's members to help Zero Wing with a task, she could easily approve this matter with her authority. Alright, I'll write up a contract. You should place a bid first. Shi Feng smiled when he heard Mu Lingsha's reply. With the help of a super first-rate guild like Unyielding Soul, he could proceed smoothly with the next step of his plans. Compared to what he stood to gain through this help, making a few thousand coins of profit was not worth mentioning whatsoever. Since both sides had come to an agreement, Mu Lingsha hurriedly placed a new bid. 632,000 gold. Mu Lingsha shouted. The secret pavilion's internal auction was different from the auctions held in God's domain, where players had to have enough currency in their pockets to place their bids. The secret pavilion did not bother verifying how much the bidders had. It would be fine so long as the buyer could pay for their purchase afterward. The silent auction venue immediately livened once again with Mu Lingsha's bid. How does Unyielding Soul still have money? Lu Xingluo's gaze turned chilling as he glared at Mu Lingsha's room. He had thought that the auction for the magic crystal vein was already over, never imagining that Mu Lingsha still hadn't given up hope. He immediately placed a new bid to thoroughly suppress her. 640,000 gold. 642,000 gold. 650,000 gold. 652,000 gold. A heated struggle between Lu Xinglua and Mu Lingsha broke out, the price reaching 672,000 gold in short order. This situation shocked the various superpowers present. These superpowers were fully aware of the financial strength of their rivals. Even if some of them were superior to others, the disparity was not that much. However, the wealth the Starline Corporation and Unyielding Soul were displaying had already exceeded the liquid assets a superpower should wield. This was no longer a competition of liquidity. This was basically an all-out struggle between two superpowers. This is impossible. Unyielding Soul can't possibly have this much money. Lu Xinglua said as he looked at Mu Lingsha's room. Just then he happened to catch sight of Mu Lingsha signing some kind of contract with Shifeng. Damn it. That little bug dares to lend money to Unyielding Soul. At this moment even a fool could tell that Zero Wing had lent Unyielding Soul a lot of coins. Hence, Super First-Rate Guild was able to persist in this auction. Mu Lingsha, do you think you can win against the Starline Corporation just because you borrowed some money from a little bug? Lu Xinglua placed another bid. 700,000 gold. Although Zero Wing had lent coins to Unyielding Soul, how much could an up-and-coming guild that could rival first-rate guilds possibly have? It would already be plenty amazing if Zero Wing had even 70,000 or 80,000 gold. If Lu Xinglua included the amount of money Zero Wing spent earlier, he estimated that the guild would be able to lend around 50,000 gold at most to Mu Lingsha. Previously, she had also stopped placing bids after the price reached 630,000 gold, which meant that her personal limit was 630,000 gold. Including the 50,000 gold from Zero Wing, she would have only around 680,000 gold in total. With his bid of 700,000 gold, he would definitely triumph over Mu Lingsha. The people inside the auction venue gasped upon hearing Lu Xinglua's bid. If he were to spend so much money to acquire the magic crystal vein, he would have to wait for 3 months or so just to recoup his costs. However, 700,000 gold at this stage of the game was definitely more valuable than 700,000 gold 3 months later. After all, coins and magic crystals were constantly depreciating in value in God's domain. Of course, the purchase also wasn't without benefits. With the magic crystal vein, Lu Xinglua would convert 700,000 gold into magic crystals and various rare ores. In the long term, it was still more beneficial to have the magic crystal vein than not to have it. However, before Yuan Tiexin could even hammer his gavel once, Mu Lingsha made another bid. 710,000 gold. Are you kidding me? How does Unyielding Soul have so much money? The people present were dumbfounded at Mu Lingsha's bid. Logically, the increment in price should taper off as the auction approached its end. Yet now Mu Lingsha had actually raised the size of her increment to 10,000 gold. Impossible. Lu Xinglua could not help but turn to look at Shifeng, confusion written on his face. How can a new guild like his possibly have so much money? Guild leader, what should we do? We only have a little over 703,000 gold left. We don't have any more money to continue bidding, Zhong Langqing said anxiously. Good. Very good. Lu Xinglua's gaze turned deathly chilling. Contact the secret pavilion and tell them I have some business with them. Understood. Zhong Langqing immediately contacted a representative from the secret pavilion. Meanwhile, when Mu Lingsha saw that Lu Xinglua had stopped bidding, she could not help but breathe out a sigh of relief. Had Shifeng lent her only 60,000 gold, she definitely wouldn't have been able to compete with Lu Xinglua. However, with 100,000 gold, she was able to thoroughly suppress him. Moreover, during the time she was competing with Lu Xinglua, as she worried that she wouldn't have enough funds, she had someone in her guild mortgage several plots of golden land in Dark Knight City and gained another 60,000 gold. The coins would be transferred later to her God's domain account. Seeing that nobody was bidding, Yuan Tiexin very quickly slammed his gavel once, saying, 710,000 going once. Is there anyone willing to place a higher bid? You should know that this is very likely to be your only chance to see a magic crystal vein. You might not get another chance like this in the future. At this moment Yuan Tiexing was ecstatic. After all, in just under a minute, he had earned nearly 100,000 gold more for the vein. However, despite Yuan Tiexing's words, the auction venue remained silent. Nobody was willing to place any more bids. 710,000, going twice. Seeing that nobody was responding even after some time, Yuan Tiexing understood that this was the highest price he could sell the vein for. He then readied himself to slam his gavel for the third time and confirm the final owner of the magic crystal vein. When Mu Lingsha saw this, she was thrilled. 720,000 gold. At this time, however, Lu Xinglua suddenly broke the silence. How is this possible? Mu Lingsha was astounded as she looked at Lu Xinglua's solemn expression. Nevertheless, she very quickly placed another bid, saying, 730,000 gold. 750,000 gold. Lu Xinglua said, sending a chilling glare at Mu Lingsha and Shifeng. Despite Lu Xinglua's glare, Mu Lingsha showed no intentions of giving up whatsoever. 760,000 gold. 770,000 gold. 780,000 gold. 800,000 gold. In the end, Lu Xinglua directly raised the price by an additional 20,000 gold, causing Mu Lingsha's complexion to darken considerably. That price exceeded the limits of what she could afford. In the end, after Yuan Tiexing slammed his gavel 3 times, Lu Xinglua was announced the winner of the Magic Crystal Veins management rights. This outcome sent the entire auction venue into an uproar. 800,000 gold. This was already double the liquid funds a superpower possessed at this stage of the game. Although Lu Xinglua had acquired the magic crystal vein, throughout the remaining part of the auction, he glared hatefully at Mu Lingsha and Shifeng. In order to emerge as the final victor, he had been forced to sell a large amount of high-level energy to the secret pavilion, far more than what the corporation had authorized. Although he eventually won the auction, he had to spend nearly 200,000 gold more. How could he possibly be in a mood for celebration? Langqing, once we return, gather all the information you can find on Zero Wing and pass it to Dark Soul. Have Dark Soul mobilize right away. If Dark Soul is lacking in strength, have a portion of our main force support it. I want Zero Wing to disappear from God's domain immediately. Lu Xinglua said. A mere bug dares cause me to lose 200,000 gold. Understood. Zhong Langqing replied eagerly. The thing he loved doing the most was none other than annihilating small guilds. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.